A freezing Missouri afternoon, rain hammering against neon glass while somewhere beyond the storm, Harley engines growl like wolves circling a dying fire. Inside an aging roadside diner, a 9-year-old boy limps through the door carrying a filthy cast, worn-out sneakers, and the hollow stare of a child who learned survival before he learned long division. Every table turns away. Every adult pretends he doesn't exist. But in the back corner sits a man covered in ink and silence. A man who has buried more ghosts than most people have met. The boy stops beside him, and what happens next will shatter everything this town has been hiding for over a year. Stay with me until the very end of this one. If this story hits you, drop a like right now, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Trust me, you are not ready for where this goes. The grilled cheese arrived before the boy's hands stopped trembling. Eli Mercer sat in the cracked vinyl booth with his shoulders pulled inward like he was trying to disappear inside his own rib cage. The cast on his left leg was gray with filth, the plaster edges soft and peeling where moisture had worked its way in over weeks. Maybe months. His sneakers were a size too small, the soles worn through at the ball of each foot, and his jacket, a men's medium that swallowed him whole, smelled like motor oil and mildew, and something underneath that Reaper Cole couldn't quite name, but recognized in his gut the way a man recognizes the sound of a round being chambered in a dark room. Fear. Old fear. The kind that lives in fabric. Reaper hadn't said a word since sliding the chair out. He sat with his coffee going cold, his weathered leather vest hanging open over a black thermal, the patches faded from years of wind and highway sun. His hands were scarred across the knuckles, not decorative scars, not the kind men brag about. Working scars, fighting scars. The kind that come from hitting things that don't move and things that hit back. His jaw was set in a permanent clench that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the fact that relaxation was a skill he had never learned and probably never would. He watched the boy eat, not casually, not the way someone watches a stranger's kid in a diner. He watched the way a man watches a wound being cleaned, with stillness, with attention, with the quiet understanding that what he was seeing was evidence of something that shouldn't exist. Eli ate like he was afraid the food would be taken away. He didn't chew. He tore. Small hands pulling the sandwich apart in pieces and pushing them into his mouth with the mechanical urgency of someone who had learned that meals were not guaranteed. His eyes stayed on the plate. His breathing was shallow and fast. Every few seconds his gaze flicked to the diner door like a dog tracking the sound of a chain being rattled. Outside, the storm pressed against the windows with a low moan that made the neon beer signs flicker. The parking lot was a sheet of gray water broken only by the bulk of Reaper's bike under its rain cover and the dull shapes of pickup trucks belonging to the regulars who filled the counter stools and pretended the limping boy hadn't walked through the door 5 minutes ago. That was the part that sat wrong in Reaper's chest. Not the cast, not the jacket, not the way the boy had stood in the doorway dripping rainwater onto the linoleum while every head in the room turned and then turned back. It was the turning back. Every single one of them had seen the boy. Every single one of them had made the calculation, the cost of involvement versus the comfort of ignorance, and chosen the booth, the coffee, the sports segment playing on the mounted television. The waitress had looked at Eli for a full 3 seconds before walking to refill a trucker's cup. The cook had glanced through the service window and then ducked below the line. A woman in a quilted vest had pulled her purse closer to her body, as if poverty were contagious, and Eli had absorbed all of it, not with surprise, with confirmation. This was not a boy encountering rejection. This was a boy whose entire understanding of the world had been built on it. Reaper set his coffee down. The ceramic clicked against the table louder than he intended, and Eli flinched, not a small flinch, a full-body contraction, shoulders up, chin down, hands curling protectively over the plate, and then a slow release when no blow followed. The whole sequence lasted maybe 2 seconds. To anyone else, it would have looked like a shiver. To Reaper, it looked like a language he had spent 30 years trying to forget. "Hey." His voice was low, gravel and smoke. "Nobody's taking that from you." Eli's eyes came up, brown, too large for his face, wet, but not crying, dried out, like a faucet that had been wrung until nothing was left. "I know," the boy said, but his hands didn't move off the plate. The diner hummed with the sounds of ordinary life. Forks on ceramic, the hiss of the grill, a country song playing too quietly to identify from the speakers mounted above the pie case. Rain against glass. The low murmur of conversations that meant nothing, about weather and fuel prices and someone's transmission. Reaper leaned back in the booth and let the silence work. He had learned a long time ago, in places he didn't talk about, during years he didn't count, that silence was the only invitation some people could accept. Words were demands, questions were traps, but silence was a door left open without anyone standing in the frame. Eli finished the sandwich. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and then wiped his hand on the oversized jacket, and Reaper caught the flash of something on the boy's wrist before the sleeve fell back down. A mark. Not a bruise, too uniform, too deliberate. The kind of mark that comes from something being held too tight for too long. He filed it away, said nothing. "Thank you," Eli said. His voice was thin but precise, each word placed carefully like a kid who had learned early that saying the wrong thing had consequences. "For the chair and the food." "You didn't eat today." It wasn't a question. Eli's jaw tightened. A muscle moved beneath the skin that shouldn't have been visible on a 9-year-old's face. "I ate yesterday, crackers, from the gas station on Route 9. That's a long walk from anywhere. 3 miles. But I know a shortcut through the lumberyard if you stay near the fence." Reaper felt something shift in his chest. Not pity. He had cauterized that nerve years ago. Something colder. Something with teeth. A 9-year-old boy who knew the distance to a gas station by foot. Who mapped shortcuts through industrial property? Who measured his meals in days rather than hours? "Where's your people?" Reaper asked. Eli's hand went to his jacket pocket. An unconscious movement, protective, the way someone touches a wound they are trying to hide. "My uncle. He's my guardian, since my mom—" The word caught. He swallowed it. "Since last year." "Where is he now?" "Working. He works a lot." The boy's voice changed on that word. Working. It went flat. Rehearsed. Like a line he had been told to say so many times it no longer carried meaning. "And you're out here." "He doesn't know I'm out here." Reaper studied the boy's face, the map of it, the dark circles pressed into the skin beneath his eyes like thumbprints, a small scar at his hairline, faded but irregular, the kind that comes from an edge rather than a fall. The way his shoulders sat slightly uneven, the left one hitched higher as if protecting something underneath. "Your leg," Reaper said. "How long ago?" "The cast?" "The break." Eli looked down at the filthy plaster. "I don't know. A while. Maybe 2 months." "Who said it?" "The emergency room. But we only went once. Uncle Dale said the insurance wouldn't cover follow-ups." "Has a doctor looked at it since?" The boy shook his head. The motion was small, almost imperceptible, and it carried with it a weight that no child should have been able to generate. Reaper looked at the cast again. 2 months. No follow-up. On a 9-year-old's leg. The plaster was cracked along the shin, discolored, the edges pulling away from the skin where the boy's calf had likely swelled without relief. Walking on it, 3 miles to a gas station, through a lumberyard, along a fence, would have been excruciating. And yet the boy had walked into this diner on his own 2 feet and asked for a chair with the careful politeness of someone who expected to be told no. The waitress appeared at the edge of the booth, mid-50s, hard face, eyes that had seen enough late-night shifts to recognize trouble and enough paychecks to know the cost of getting involved. "You want the check?" she asked Reaper, not looking at Eli, not acknowledging the boy at all. "Bring him another sandwich and a glass of milk." "He with you?" Reaper's eyes came up, flat, dark, the kind of look that doesn't threaten because it doesn't need to. "He's with me." The waitress left. Her shoes squeaked on the linoleum as she retreated to the counter, and Reaper caught her exchanging a glance with the cook through the window. A glance that said she knew. Maybe not the details, maybe not the full shape of it, but she knew something was wrong with this boy, and she had decided that knowing was someone else's job. Eli was watching him again. That same careful, calculating stare. "You're a biker," the boy said. "Yeah. Like a real one, not like the guys on TV." "Nothing on TV is real." "Are you dangerous?" Reaper almost smiled. Almost. The muscles in his face shifted but didn't complete the motion. "Depends on who's asking." "I'm asking." "Then no." Eli processed that. His fingers were tracing the edge of the table, following the grain of the wood with the absent precision of a child whose mind was always working, always calculating escape routes and threat levels, and the distance between himself and the nearest exit. "My uncle is dangerous," Eli said quietly. The diner noise didn't change. The country song kept playing. The rain kept falling. But something in the air between them went cold and still, like the moment between lightning and thunder when the world holds its breath. Reaper didn't move, didn't lean forward, didn't change his expression. He let the words sit on the table between them like a loaded weapon and waited for the boy to decide what to do next. Eli's hand went back to his jacket pocket. This time it came out holding something small. A keychain tag, the kind motels clip to their room keys. Faded plastic, cracked at one corner, with a room number scratched into the surface, and the name of a motel Reaper didn't recognize. The Ridgeline Motor Lodge, Room 14. The boy set it on the table between them. "I took this from his truck," Eli said. His voice was barely above a whisper now. 2 weeks ago. He was on the phone and he didn't know I was in the back seat. He was talking to someone about insurance, about my mom's insurance, about how the money comes faster if—" He stopped. His whole body went rigid, and Reaper could see the tendons in the boy's neck straining like cables under load. "If what?" Reaper asked. Eli's eyes filled, not with tears, with something worse, the flat, dead recognition of a child who has understood something too large for his mind to contain. "If it looks natural," the boy whispered. He said if it looks natural, nobody investigates. The second grilled cheese arrived. Eli didn't touch it. Reaper stared at the motel key tag on the table. His pulse was steady. Years of training had severed the connection between his heartbeat and his emotions. But beneath the stillness, something was moving. Something old and black and familiar. The same thing that had moved through him in Fallujah when he had seen what men were capable of doing to people who couldn't fight back. The same thing that had moved through him in a VA hospital parking lot 3 years later when he had sat in the dark with a bottle and a decision and chosen, for reasons he still didn't fully understand, to keep breathing. He picked up the key tag, turned it over. The plastic was warm from the boy's hand. "Does anyone else know about this?" Eli shook his head. "Your teachers? Neighbors?" "Nobody listens." The boy said it without self-pity, without anger, as a fact, the way someone says the sky is gray or the road is long. "I tried telling the school nurse about my leg. She called my uncle and he told her I fell off my bike. She believed him. Everybody believes him." "Why?" "Because he smiles. He smiles all the time. He brings cookies to the school office. He coaches Little League on Saturdays. He stands in the front yard and waves at the neighbors." Eli's mouth twisted. "Nobody who smiles that much should be trusted." Reaper felt the gravity of that sentence land somewhere in his sternum. A 9-year-old boy who had decoded the architecture of a predator, not through education, through exposure, through being trapped inside the machinery and learning its gears by the marks they left on his body. He slid the key tag into his vest pocket. "I'm going to make a phone call." Eli's hand shot across the table and grabbed Reaper's wrist. The grip was desperate, the fingers thin and cold, and the boy's eyes went wide with a terror that had nothing to do with strangers and everything to do with the one person who was supposed to keep him safe. "If you call the police, he'll know. He'll know I talked. Last time someone from the school asked questions, The boy's voice broke. "He locked the garage for 4 days. I had a bucket, just a bucket." The diner buzzed around them. Someone laughed at the counter. The cook banged a pan. The television murmured scores from a game nobody was watching. And a boy sat across from a man who had seen combat in 3 countries and told him about a bucket. Reaper didn't pull his wrist away. He let the boy hold on. Let the cold fingers press into his skin until the pressure became its own kind of communication. A signal sent in the only language Eli had left. I'm not calling the police, Reaper said. Eli's grip loosened slightly. Then who? Reaper stood. His full height filled the booth frame, the patches on his vest catching the neon light. Iron Hollow MC, Sergeant at Arms. The Reaper skull on his back patch stared out at the diner with empty eyes that matched the man wearing it. Family, he said. He walked to the door, pushed it open into the rain. The cold hit him like a wall. Missouri winter cold, the kind that doesn't sting but settles into bone and stays there. He pulled his phone from his vest and dialed a number he had memorized the way soldiers memorize coordinates. One ring. Grim. The voice on the other end was quiet, patient, the kind of voice that could talk a man down from a ledge or send him off one, depending on what the situation required. Vince, I need you at the diner on Route 12. Bring Deacon and Cass. What's the situation? Reaper looked back through the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could see Eli sitting alone in the booth, both hands wrapped around the glass of milk like it was the only warm thing he had touched in months. A kid, Reaper said. 9 years old. Broken leg nobody treated. Bruises he's hiding. And a motel key he stole from a man who's planning something I don't want to say on a phone. Silence on the line. Not empty silence. Processing silence. The silence of a man running calculations. How long until you need us? Now. 20 minutes. The line went dead. Reaper stood in the rain for a moment longer. The water ran down his face, through his beard, into the collar of his vest. His bike sat under its cover 10 feet away, the chrome catching the fractured light from the diner sign. Somewhere down Route 12, a truck passed with its headlights cutting pale tunnels through the storm. He thought about the motel key. The Ridgeline Motor Lodge. Room 14. He thought about what a man keeps in a motel room that he doesn't keep in his house. He thought about the word natural and the way it sounded in the mouth of someone who had already made a plan. Then he went back inside. Eli was exactly where he had left him, hands on the milk, eyes on the door. The boy tracked Reaper's return the way prey tracks a predator, and it took a visible effort, a conscious softening of his shoulders, a deliberate unclenching of his jaw, for Eli to recognize that this particular predator was not his enemy. They're coming, Reaper said. Who? Men I trust. I don't trust anyone. Reaper sat down. The vinyl creaked. He looked at the boy across the table and the dirty cast, the too big jacket, the eyes that belonged on a man 3 decades older. And he said the only honest thing he could say. You don't have to trust them. You just have to let them see what I see. Eli considered that. Rain streaked the window beside him, the water bending the neon light into shapes that moved across his face like something alive. What do you see? The boy asked. Reaper picked up his coffee. It was cold now. He drank it anyway. A kid who walked 3 miles on a broken leg in the rain to sit in a diner where nobody would help him. A kid who stole evidence from a man twice his size because he understood that nobody was coming to save him. A kid who's smarter and braver than every adult in this room. He set the cup down. That's what I see. Eli's lower lip trembled. Just once. Then it stopped, and the boy's face went still again, and Reaper recognized that stillness for what it was. Not strength, not composure, but the shutdown reflex of a child who had learned that showing emotion was an invitation for punishment. He wanted to tell the boy it was safe to cry. He didn't, because it wasn't safe. Not yet. Not here. Not with the uncle out there somewhere in the storm, driving routes, checking routines, perhaps already noticing that the boy was gone. 20 minutes. That's what Grim had said. 18 minutes now. The door opened. Not the Brotherhood. A man in a county sheriff's department jacket stepped in, shaking rain off his hat. He took a stool at the counter, ordered coffee, and nodded at the waitress with the ease of a regular. His name tag read D. Hartwell. He was heavy in the shoulders, red in the face, and he glanced at Eli the way you glance at a piece of furniture you've decided isn't your problem. Reaper watched the deputy settle in, watched him joke with the cook, watched him stir sugar into his coffee with the unhurried patience of a man who had never once in his life felt what the boy in the back booth was feeling. Eli saw the uniform. His reaction was instant and involuntary, a pulling inward, a contraction of every muscle, a sudden intense focus on the table surface, as if looking at the deputy would summon something terrible. "He's been to our house," Eli whispered. "Deputy Hartwell. He comes over sometimes. Him and Uncle Dale watch football together." The information landed in Reaper's chest like a fist. Not just a guardian with law enforcement connections. A guardian who brought cookies to the school and coached Little League and watched football with the county deputy. A guardian who had built a fortress of likability around himself so that every door the boy might run through was already locked from the other side. Reaper understood then, fully, completely, in the way that understanding sometimes arrives not as a thought, but as a physical sensation. Why the boy had walked 3 miles on a broken leg to a diner full of strangers instead of asking any one of the adults in his life for help. There was no one to ask. The system that was supposed to protect him was the same system that sat at the counter stirring sugar into its coffee. 14 minutes. Eli's eyes went to the window. Something changed in his face, a drain of color, a tightening around the jaw, a stillness that went beyond fear into the territory of something animal and ancient. "That's his truck," the boy said. Reaper followed his gaze. Through the rain-streaked glass, pulling into the far end of the parking lot, a black Ford F250 with mud-caked wheel wells and a cracked taillight eased to a stop. The headlights stayed on. The engine kept running. Through the windshield wiper's rhythm, a shape sat behind the wheel, not moving, watching the diner the way a predator watches a watering hole. Eli's breathing went shallow. His hands dropped from the milk glass to his lap, and Reaper could see them shaking beneath the table edge. "He found me," the boy said. His voice was flat, evacuated. The voice of a child who has entered a survival state so complete that emotion becomes a luxury the body can no longer afford. "He always finds me." Reaper looked at the truck, looked at the deputy at the counter, looked at the clock above the pie case. 12 minutes until the Brotherhood arrived. The truck door opened. A man stepped out into the rain. Tall, well-built, clean-shaven with a jawline that belonged on a campaign poster. He wore a pressed flannel shirt under a dark canvas jacket and moved with the easy confidence of someone who had never been questioned in a meaningful way by anyone in his life. Dale Mercer. Uncle, guardian, Little League coach, cookie baker, the man who smiled too much. He didn't rush toward the diner. He stood beside his truck for a moment, adjusting his collar, running a hand through his rain-dampened hair, composing his face into an expression of mild concern that was so practiced it looked almost real. Then he walked toward the door. At the counter, Deputy Hartwell looked up from his coffee and smiled. "Dale, hell of a night to be out." "Tell me about it." Dale's voice was warm, resonant, the kind of voice that made people feel comfortable and safe, and Reaper recognized it immediately for what it was. A weapon. A carefully maintained weapon, more dangerous than anything he carried in his saddlebag, because it was the kind of weapon that made people hand over their children. "Have you seen Eli? He wandered off again. Kid's been having a rough patch since his mom passed." The waitress pointed toward the back booth. Dale's eyes found Eli, and for one fraction of a second, so fast that only someone watching for it would have caught it, something moved behind that polished expression. Something cold. Something proprietary. The look of a man who has spotted an object that belongs to him in someone else's hands. Then the smile returned, wider and warmer than before, and Dale Mercer walked toward the back of the diner with his arms slightly open and his head tilted at an angle that conveyed nothing but fatherly concern. "There you are, buddy. You had me worried sick." Eli didn't move, didn't look up. His hands were clenched in his lap so tightly that his knuckles had gone white, and a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. Reaper stayed seated. His coffee cup sat on the table between them like a boundary marker. Dale stopped at the edge of the booth. His eyes moved from Eli to Reaper, and the assessment was instant. The vest, the patches, the tattoos, the scarred knuckles, the flat expression that gave nothing and promised less. "I appreciate you looking after him," Dale said. The warmth was still there, but underneath it, Reaper could hear the gears turning. Calculation, risk assessment. The quick mental inventory of a man deciding how much of a problem the stranger in the booth was going to be. "He's got a habit of running off. Still processing grief, you know how it is." "His leg's broken," Reaper said. "Yeah, we've been dealing with that. Insurance nightmare. You know the system. I know the system. Dale's smile held, but something flickered at its edges. He extended his hand toward Eli. Come on, bud. Let's get you home and warmed up. Eli didn't take the hand. He was staring at the table with an intensity that bordered on catatonic, and Reaper could see the boy's chest barely moving, his breathing so shallow it was almost imperceptible. Eli. Dale's voice dropped half a register, still warm, still controlled, but the command underneath it was unmistakable, the voice of a man accustomed to obedience. Let's go. Reaper's hand moved to the table. He didn't stand, didn't raise his voice. He simply placed his palm flat on the surface between Dale's reaching hand and the boy, and he looked up at the uncle with eyes that had seen Fallujah and the VA and the bottom of every bottle in between. He's eating, Reaper said. The diner went quiet. Not silent. The grill still hissed, the rain still fell, the television still murmured, but the human noise stopped. Conversations paused. The cook appeared in the service window. Deputy Hartwell turned on his stool. Dale's smile didn't waver, but his eyes changed. A hardening. A recalibration. The mask was still on, but behind it, something darker was pressing against the glass. I appreciate your concern, friend, but this is a family matter. Didn't say it wasn't. Then you understand I need to take my nephew home. Reaper looked at Eli. The boy's eyes were closed now, and his lips were moving without sound, forming words or numbers or a pattern that only he understood. A coping mechanism. A mental escape hatch. The kind of internal ritual that children develop in captivity. I understand a lot of things, Reaper said. His voice hadn't changed. Low, level. The voice of a man who had discovered long ago that volume was unnecessary when certainty was present. I understand a 9-year-old walked 3 miles in the rain on a leg that hasn't been treated in 2 months. I understand nobody in this diner offered him a seat. And I understand that you drove here real calm for a man whose kid just disappeared. The temperature between them dropped. Dale's hand withdrew slowly. He straightened. The smile was still there, but it was thinner now, stretched tight across whatever was underneath, and his eyes moved to Deputy Hartwell at the counter with a look that was brief and specific and loaded with expectation. Hartwell set down his coffee. Everything all right over here? Dale turned to him with the practiced ease of a man pulling his favorite tool from a shelf. Just trying to get my nephew home. It's been a long day. Hartwell stood, hitched his belt, walked toward the booth with the unhurried authority of a man who had never once considered that his badge might be covering for the wrong side of a story. Sir, Hartwell said to Reaper, I know Dale, good man. If the boy's his, there's no issue here. There's an issue, Reaper said. And what would that be? Reaper looked at the deputy, looked at Dale, looked at the boy with his eyes closed and his lips moving and his broken leg hidden under a table in a diner where nobody had helped him. 7 minutes. He could feel it now, the weight of the decision pressing down on the moment like a hand on a trigger. If he spoke, he was committing. If he told the deputy what the boy had told him, Dale would deny it, Hartwell would believe Dale, and Eli would go home in that black truck to whatever was waiting for him inside that locked garage. But if he waited, 7 minutes, just 7 minutes, the balance would shift. No issue, deputy, Reaper said. He looked at Dale. I just asked if the boy could finish his sandwich, that's all. Dale studied him. The calculation was visible, the effort of a man deciding whether this biker was an obstacle or an inconvenience. After a moment, the smile returned. Of course. Take your time, buddy. He patted Eli's shoulder, and the boy flinched so hard the table shook, and every person in that diner saw it, and not one of them said a word. Dale walked back toward the counter. Hartwell followed. They stood together near the register, voices low, Dale's hand on the deputy's arm in a gesture of fraternal ease that made Reaper's jaw ache with the effort of staying still. 6 minutes. 5. Eli opened his eyes. He's not going to let me leave with anyone else. I know. The deputy will do whatever he says. I know. Then what happens in 6 minutes that changes anything? Reaper looked at the boy. This child who counted minutes and mapped escape routes and understood the politics of power better than most grown men. This child who had already calculated the odds and found them worthless. In about 5 minutes, Reaper said, That parking lot is going to sound like the end of the world. And when it does, I need you to stay exactly where you are." Eli looked at him, searching, weighing, running the math one more time. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I haven't smiled once since you sat down." Something moved behind the boy's eyes. Recognition. The smallest, most fragile thing Reaper had seen in years. The first tremor of trust in a child who had every reason to never trust again. Then the sound came, distant at first. A low growl at the edge of hearing, felt more in the chest than heard by the ears. Building, multiplying, the unmistakable harmonic of V-twin engines, not one or two, but a dozen or more, converging on Route 12 from every direction like a storm within the storm. Dale Mercer's head turned toward the window. The smile died. Deputy Hartwell's hand moved to his belt. And through the rain, through the neon-streaked darkness, headlights appeared. Pair after pair after pair, cutting through the storm like the eyes of something ancient and immovable, turning into the parking lot in a formation that was neither rushed nor casual, but carried the deliberate, unhurried weight of men who had arrived at a conclusion and had no intention of leaving without resolution. The engines cut simultaneously. 16 bikes. The silence that followed was louder than the sound that preceded it. The diner door opened. The first man through was not the largest, not the loudest, not the most visibly dangerous. He was lean, gray at the temples, with a face that looked like it had been carved from wood left out in weather for decades. His vest bore the president's patch of Iron Hollow MC. His boots left wet prints on the linoleum, and he walked with the measured gait of a man who had learned in combat that every step carries the weight of a decision. Vince Grim Hollow stopped in the center of the diner. He didn't look at Dale, didn't look at the deputy, didn't look at the regulars frozen at their tables, or the waitress gripping a coffee pot, or the cook standing motionless in the service window. He looked at Eli, and the boy, for the first time since he had limped through that door, sat up straight. Behind Grim, the door opened again, and again, and again. Men in leather, men with scars, men whose silence carried more authority than the badge on Hartwell's belt. They filed in without a word, filling the diner with the smell of rain and engine oil and leather. And they positioned themselves with the unconscious coordination of men who had stood together in places where positioning was the difference between living and dying. Dale Mercer stood at the counter with his smile gone and his hand gripping the edge of the register, and his eyes moving from face to face to face, counting, calculating, realizing with the cold precision of a predator who has suddenly become prey that the arithmetic of this room had fundamentally changed. Grim walked to the back booth. He looked at Reaper, looked at the boy, looked at the filthy cast and the too big jacket and the untouched grilled cheese and the glass of milk held by hands that had finally stopped shaking. "This him?" Grim asked. Reaper reached into his vest pocket and placed the motel key tag on the table. "Ridgeline Motor Lodge, room 14. The boy will tell you what he told me when he's ready." Grim picked up the key tag, studied it. Then he looked at Dale Mercer across the diner, a long, level look that carried no threat and no warmth, only the absolute certainty of a man who has spent his life identifying enemies and has just identified another one. Dale's mouth opened. The smile tried to come back. It almost made it. Then Grim turned to Deputy Hartwell, and his voice filled the diner the way smoke fills a room, slowly, completely, leaving no corner untouched. "Deputy, I'd suggest you call your captain, because what's about to come to light in this county is going to require someone above your pay grade." Hartwell's face went red. His hand was still on his belt, but the gesture had lost its authority, diminished by the simple mathematics of 16 men in leather standing between him and the easy resolution he had been counting on. Dale took one step toward the booth. Every biker in the room shifted, not aggressively, not theatrically, just shifted. The way a wall shifts when you push against it and discover it's not drywall, but concrete. Dale stopped. And in the back booth of a roadside diner on Route 12, in the middle of a Missouri rainstorm, a 9-year-old boy with a broken leg and a stolen motel key looked up at a room full of men who had ridden through a storm because a stranger made a phone call, and for the first time in over a year, Eli Mercer exhaled. Not all the way. Not safely. Not yet. Because Dale Mercer was still standing in the diner with the eyes of a man who had never once lost control of a situation, and as Eli watched his uncle's face cycle through fear and rage and calculation, he saw the one thing that terrified him more than the locked garage, more than the bucket, more than the whispered phone call about making something look natural. He saw his uncle smile again, and this time the smile was aimed directly at him. The smile lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds of Dale Mercer standing in the middle of a diner surrounded by 16 bikers, his face locked in that practiced expression of warmth and concern, his eyes calculating exit routes and leverage points and the precise political geometry of a situation that had spiraled beyond his control. 3 seconds during which every man in leather watched him, the way soldiers watch a tripwire, with absolute stillness and the understanding that what happens next depends entirely on which direction the tension breaks. Then Dale dropped the smile and did something none of them expected. He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Yeah, it's Dale. I'm at the Route 12 diner. I've got a situation with Eli." He wandered off again, and now there's a group of bikers involved. "I need you to send a unit." A pause. His voice shifted, climbing into a register of controlled distress that was so convincing Reaper felt his own pulse spike despite knowing better. "I'm concerned for his safety. These men won't let me take him home." He hung up, looked at Grim, and in the silence that followed, Dale Mercer's face rearranged itself into the expression of a man who had just played a card he believed was unbeatable. The concerned guardian, outnumbered by dangerous strangers, calling for help to protect his orphaned nephew. Grim didn't react. He stood in the center of the diner with his hands at his sides and his weight evenly distributed, and his face carrying the same expression it had carried since he walked through the door. The flat, patient neutrality of a man who had seen enough combat to understand that the first person to escalate is usually the first person to lose. "Deacon," Grim said without turning. A man near the door stepped forward, shorter than the others, built like a fireplug, with a shaved head and a beard that hung to his chest. His vest bore the secretary patch, and the pen clipped to his inner pocket was as much a part of his identity as the .45 he wasn't carrying tonight. Deacon had done 2 tours in Afghanistan and come home with a Purple Heart, a titanium plate in his skull, and a graduate degree in criminal justice that he had earned in a VA hospital bed between surgeries. "Pull everything," Grim said. "County records, school reports, medical filings, anything attached to the name Mercer in this jurisdiction." Deacon nodded and walked to the far corner of the diner, already working his phone with the focused precision of a man who understood that evidence was the only currency that mattered in a courtroom. Dale watched him go. A muscle tightened in his jaw. "This is harassment," Dale said. His voice had shifted again. Harder now, the warmth draining out of it like heat from a room with an open window. "I don't know who you people are, but you have no right." "We're not law enforcement," Grim said. "We're not social services. We're not taking your nephew anywhere." He paused. Let the words settle. "We're staying in this diner, drinking coffee, and we'll be here when the authorities arrive to sort this out properly." "The authorities are right here," Dale gestured toward Hartwell, who was still standing at the counter with the frozen posture of a man caught between loyalties he didn't know he had. "Deputy, would you—" "I called my captain," Hartwell said. His voice was strained. He was looking at Eli, really looking, maybe for the first time. And whatever he saw in the boy's face had put a crack in the foundation he'd been standing on. "Someone's coming." Dale stared at him. The betrayal was instant and visible. A flash of something raw and furious that crossed his face before the mask snapped back into place. Hartwell had been his insurance policy, his proof of character, the badge that validated his smile. And now that badge was calling for backup instead of clearing the room. "This is ridiculous," Dale said. But he didn't move toward Eli, didn't try to touch the boy, didn't raise his voice beyond the calibrated tone of reasonable frustration. Even now, cornered, outnumbered, watching his careful architecture begin to fracture, Dale Mercer was performing. Every word, every gesture, every shift in expression was designed for an audience. The regulars at their tables, the waitress at the counter, the deputy who might still be swayed. He was building a narrative in real time, constructing himself as the victim, the reasonable man beset by unreasonable circumstances. And Reaper had to admit, the man was good at it. Eli hadn't moved from the booth. His eyes were open now, tracking his uncle with the hypervigilance of a child who has memorized every micro-expression on a dangerous man's face, the way a prisoner memorizes the sound of footsteps approaching his cell. His hands were flat on the table, perfectly still, as if any movement might attract attention. Reaper sat beside him, close enough that his shoulder blocked the boy's line of sight to Dale. A wall of leather and scar tissue between the child and the man who had locked him in a garage with a bucket. "You're doing fine," Reaper said quietly, not looking at the boy, looking at Dale. "He's going to talk his way out of this," Eli whispered. "He always does." "Not tonight. You don't know him." "I don't need to know him. I know the type." Eli's fingers pressed harder against the table surface. "The type doesn't lose. The type has friends and insurance and a clean record and a smile that makes everybody want to believe him. The type coaches Little League. The type gets Christmas cards from the principal." Reaper felt the weight of those words. A child's fluency in the language of systemic failure, the precise, articulate understanding that the structures designed to protect him were the same structures his abuser had weaponized. "The type has never met Grimm," Reaper said. Outside, the rain intensified. Water sheeted across the parking lot, flooding the gutters, turning the diner into an island of neon light surrounded by black water and darker sky. The Harleys sat in their formation like iron sentinels, their chrome catching fragments of color from the beer signs in the windows. Red, blue, green, the cold spectrum of a roadside night. Grimm had moved to the counter, not sitting, standing with one boot on the rail and his forearms on the formica, positioned so that he could see both the front door and the back booth without turning his head. The waitress had poured him coffee without being asked. Her hands were shaking. "Ma'am," Grimm said. His voice was the same low register it always was, the voice of a man who had learned in a combat zone that calm was the most dangerous frequency. "How long have you worked this shift?" 12 years? She said it like a prison sentence. "You've seen the boy before." It wasn't a question. She recognized it for what it was. A door. An opening. The kind of opportunity that comes once and doesn't come again. She looked at Dale. Dale was standing near the register, his phone in his hand, his thumb scrolling through contacts with the controlled urgency of a man assembling reinforcements. He didn't see her looking. "He comes in sometimes," she said. Her voice was barely audible above the rain. "After school, when it's cold, he orders water and sits in the back booth and does his homework." Orders water. He never has money. I've given him food when I can, left sandwiches by the register when Dale wasn't around. When Dale wasn't around. She looked down at her hands. Cracked skin, chipped polish on nails bitten to the quick. "He came in once last winter with his arm in a sling. Different arm than the leg. I asked him what happened and he said he fell. He always says he fell." Grimm waited. The silence did the work. "I should have called someone." Her voice broke on the word someone. "I know I should have. But Dale, he's on the town council. He coaches. He volunteers at the food bank. And the one time I mentioned to Donna at the school office that Eli looked thin, Dale was at the diner the next day, sat right at this counter, ordered pie, smiled at me the whole time." She swallowed. The smile was different that day. It was like a warning. Grimm set his coffee down. "What's your name?" "Lorraine." "Lorraine, when the captain gets here, someone's going to ask you to repeat what you just told me. Can you do that?" She looked at Dale again. The fear was visible. A physical thing that lived in her body the way it lived in Eli's, transferred through proximity and the intimate understanding of what a powerful man could do to a powerless woman in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and silence was the price of survival. "He'll destroy me," she whispered. "He'll try." Grimm reached across the counter, not touching her, just placing his hand on the formica, palm down, fingers spread. An anchor. A point of stillness in a room that was vibrating with the frequency of a dozen intersecting fears. "That's his only move," Grimm said. "Intimidation, control, making everyone around him afraid enough to stay quiet. It works until one person decides it doesn't. And once one person talks, the rest follow. That's how these things end. Not with a bang, with a voice." Lorraine stared at his hand, at the scarred knuckles. At the tattoo on his wrist, a set of coordinates that Reaper knew mapped to a location in Helmand Province where 3 men from Grimm's unit had died in an ambush that the official report described as an operational miscalculation and Grimm described as a betrayal. "Okay," she said. That single word changed the room, not dramatically. No one heard it except Grimm and the cook standing motionless behind the service window. But the cook heard it. And the cook had seen things too. And in the tight ecosystem of a roadside diner where everyone knew the unspoken rules, one person's courage had a gravitational pull that others could feel even if they couldn't name it. Dale was still on his phone. His voice had dropped to a murmur, and his body was angled away from the room in the posture of a man who believes privacy is achievable in a space where 16 men in leather are actively watching him. Reaper caught fragments, under control, and overreaction, and "you know me, Frank," the words of a man activating his network, pulling strings, leveraging the social capital he had spent years accumulating for exactly this kind of emergency. But the network had a problem. The network was designed for quiet situations. A school nurse's concern, a neighbor's suspicion, a caseworker's routine visit. Things that could be deflected with a smile and a handshake, and the implicit authority of a man who everyone believed was good because believing otherwise required confronting the unbearable possibility that they had been complicit in something monstrous. This was not a quiet situation. This was 16 Harleys in a parking lot and a diner full of witnesses, and a man with a president's patch standing at the counter talking to the waitress about things she had seen and never said. The network wasn't built for this. Cass appeared at Reaper's side. He was younger than the others, early 30s, lean as wire, with eyes that never stopped moving, and a nervous energy that manifested as a constant, almost imperceptible vibration in his hands. His patch said prospect, not a full member yet, still earning his place, but the patch didn't tell the whole story. Cass had been a CPS investigator in St. Louis for 4 years before burning out so completely that he had spent 3 months sleeping in his truck outside a VA facility before Deacon found him and brought him to the chapter. He slid into the booth across from Reaper and looked at Eli with the controlled neutrality of a man trained to assess damage without showing it on his face. But Reaper knew Cass well enough to read the tension in his neck, the way his jaw set hard against the words he wanted to say. The barely suppressed fury of a man who had seen exactly this kind of case 100 times and still hadn't learned how not to feel it. "Hey, buddy," Cass said to Eli. "I'm Cass. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. But I used to work in child protection, and I know how this process works. Can I ask you a few things?" Eli looked at Reaper. The question was silent but clear. "Is this safe?" Reaper nodded once. "Your leg," Cass said. "You told Reaper it's been 2 months without follow-up. Do you remember the name of the ER where they put the cast on?" "Braxton County Medical. The doctor was a woman. I don't remember her name. She had red hair." Cass made a note on his phone. "And the arm, the one that was in a sling last winter. Which arm?" Eli's face went blank, the shutdown reflex, the steel door dropping behind his eyes. "I didn't say anything about my arm." Lorraine mentioned it, the waitress. The boy's eyes cut to the counter, to Lorraine, who was wiping the same section of Formica she had been wiping for the last 5 minutes, not looking at anyone, her shoulders trembling. "The left one," Eli said. "But it wasn't—" He said it was because I was running in the house. "Were you running in the house?" The silence that followed was so complete that Reaper could hear the grease popping on the grill. "I was running," Eli said carefully. "Away from him." Cass closed his eyes. Just for a moment. A single beat of darkness behind his lids that Reaper recognized as the professional equivalent of a scream. The controlled, internalized reaction of a man who has heard this sentence too many times and never, not once, found it any easier to absorb. "Okay," Cass said. He opened his eyes. His voice was steady, but his hands had stopped vibrating. They were perfectly still now, the way a man's hands go still when he has moved past anger into the cold, permanent architecture of resolve. "Okay, buddy, that's enough for now?" Deacon appeared at the booth. He leaned down and spoke directly into Grimm's ear, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. But Reaper saw Grimm's face change. A subtle shift, a tightening around the eyes, the micro-expression of a man who has just received information that confirms his worst suspicion and eliminates any remaining possibility of a benign explanation. Grimm straightened, walked to the center of the diner, looked at Dale Mercer, who was still holding his phone with the white-knuckled grip of a man watching his lifeboat take on water. "Dale." Grimm's voice carried the way artillery carries, not loud, but concussive. "Your nephew's medical records show 3 ER visits in 11 months, 2 at Braxton County, 1 at a walk-in clinic 40 miles outside the county. Different facilities each time, different explanations. Fall from a bike, tripped on stairs, hit by a baseball at practice." Dale's jaw tightened. "Kids get hurt. He's active. That's normal. One facility might be normal. 3 different facilities in 3 different jurisdictions is a pattern. That's your interpretation? That's the interpretation of every child welfare investigator in the country, and you know it." The room held its breath. Reaper could feel it. The molecular tension of a space filled with people who were watching the walls of a carefully constructed lie begin to crack. Dale looked at Hartwell. The deputy was standing apart from both groups now, his hand no longer on his belt, his face carrying the particular expression of a man who has just realized that the ground he's been standing on is not as solid as he believed. "Deputy, this is slander," Dale said. "They're taking private medical records, and they're public record in a child welfare inquiry," Deacon said from the corner. His voice was flat, professional, carrying the authority of a man who had spent 4 years of his life reading exactly these kinds of records. "I filed a preliminary report with the state child abuse hotline 12 minutes ago. Case number assigned. An investigator from DFS will be dispatched within 72 hours, but given the circumstances, the untreated fracture, the multiple ER visits across jurisdictions, and the physical evidence on the child, I expect someone tonight." Dale's phone dropped half an inch from his ear. His composure cracked. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies, but in the small, specific ways that real control fractures when the thing it was controlling becomes too large to contain. A slight tremor in his hand, a rapid blink sequence, a thinning of the lips that turned his mouth into a line rather than a smile. "You can't," he started. "It's done," Deacon said. Outside, headlights swept across the parking lot. Not Harley's, a marked vehicle, blue and white, with a light bar on the roof and a county seal on the door. Behind it, a second vehicle, unmarked, dark sedan. Grimm watched them arrive with the same stillness he brought to everything. He turned to the Brotherhood. "Nobody moves. Nobody speaks unless spoken to. Let the process work." The front door opened. A woman entered first, mid-40s, sharp-featured, wearing a rain-damp blazer and carrying a leather portfolio that looked like it had been grabbed in a hurry. Behind her, a captain in a county uniform, heavier than Hartwell, with a face that suggested he had been pulled away from something he considered more important and wasn't happy about it. "Captain Briggs?" Hartwell said. The relief in his voice was audible. Briggs surveyed the room, the bikers, the boy in the back booth, Dale at the counter. He took a breath that expanded his entire chest and released it with the controlled exhalation of a man who recognized that this was going to be a long night. "Someone tell me what's happening," Briggs said. Dale moved first. "Captain, I'm Dale Mercer. We met at the Lions Club dinner last spring. My nephew wandered off tonight, and I came to bring him home. And these men, I'm Rachel Voss, Division of Family Services," the woman said, cutting Dale off with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent 20 years listening to men explain away the inexplicable. "I received a report flagged as urgent. I need to see the child." She walked to the back booth. Reaper watched her eyes take in the scene, the dirty cast, the oversized jacket, the untouched food, the boy's posture of contained terror, and he watched her face do the thing that Cass's face had done 5 minutes earlier, the controlled absorption, the professional mask holding steady while something underneath it shattered and reformed into something harder. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "I'm Rachel. Can I sit with you?" Eli looked at Reaper. Reaper gave the smallest nod he was capable of. Rachel Voss sat down. She opened her portfolio. She did not smile. Reaper noticed that, and he was grateful for it. because this boy had been smiling at enough, and what he needed now was not warmth, but honesty. "I'm going to ask you some questions," she said. "You can answer them or not. Nobody in this room is going to make you do anything you don't want to do tonight. Okay?" Eli's eyes went to Dale. His uncle was standing at the counter between Captain Briggs and Deputy Hartwell, and his body language had shifted again. Shoulders back, hands visible, chin up, the physical vocabulary of transparency and cooperation. But his eyes were locked on Eli with an intensity that crossed the diner like a wire drawn taut between them, vibrating with a frequency that only the two of them could hear. And Eli heard it. His mouth opened, closed. His gaze dropped to the table. "I fell off my bike," the boy said. His voice was hollow, mechanical. The rehearsed line, delivered on cue, triggered by the look on his uncle's face from 20 feet away. Rachel Voss didn't react. She made a note. "And your arm?" "Last winter?" "Tripped on the stairs." "And the bruises Reaper mentioned?" "I play rough." Silence. The diner hummed. Reaper's hands were shaking under the table, not with fear, not with anger, but with the recognition that he was watching a child retreat behind a wall that had taken years of abuse to construct. And every word the boy spoke was a brick being laid back into place by the invisible hand of a man standing 20 feet away, doing nothing more threatening than looking at him. This was how it worked. This was how it always worked. The abuser didn't need to be in the room. The abuser was in the victim's nervous system, wired into the fear response, embedded so deeply that a single look across a diner could undo everything. Every moment of courage, every whispered confession, every stolen motel key. Rachel looked at Reaper. Her eyes asked a question she couldn't voice in front of the boy. Reaper reached into his vest, placed the motel key tag on the table. "Ridgeline Motor Lodge," he said. "Room 14. The boy took it from his uncle's truck 2 weeks ago. He overheard a phone conversation about insurance money and making something look natural." Rachel's hand stopped writing. She looked at the key tag, looked at Eli. "Is this true?" she asked. Eli's breathing had gone shallow again. His eyes were on the table. His lips were moving without sound. The same silent counting, the same internal escape hatch, the same coping mechanism that had kept him alive in that garage. "Eli," Rachel said gently, "I need to hear it from you." The boy's eyes lifted. Not to Rachel, not to Reaper, to Dale. Across the diner, Dale Mercer stood with his hands in his pockets and his head tilted slightly and his face wearing an expression so perfectly calibrated between concern and confidence that it could have been printed on a campaign poster. And as Eli watched, his uncle did something small, a gesture invisible to everyone else in the room. He touched his own wrist, lightly, with 2 fingers, the same place the mark was on Eli's wrist, hidden under the oversized sleeve. A reminder. A message transmitted in the private language of captivity. Remember what happens when you talk. Eli's whole body went rigid. "I made it up," the boy said. "I make up stories. Uncle Dale says I have an overactive imagination." Cass stood up from the booth so fast the table rocked. He walked out the front door and into the rain, and through the window Reaper could see him standing beside a Harley with his hands on the handlebars, and his head down, and his shoulders heaving with something that might have been rage or grief or both. Rachel Voss made another note. Her pen moved steadily, professionally, but her knuckles were white. Grim materialized beside the booth. He didn't sit. He stood, looking down at the boy with an expression that Reaper had only seen once before. In a field hospital in Helmand, when Grim had stood over the bed of a 19-year-old private who had lost both legs and was insisting he was fine, and Grim had said nothing because some lies are told for survival, and surviving is not a thing you punish. "Hey, kid," Grim said. His voice was different now, lower, softer, not gentle. Grim didn't do gentle, but there was something in it that bypassed the armor, something that spoke not to the terrified child performing obedience, but to the other child, the real one, the one trapped behind the wall. "You don't have to say anything tonight. Not one word. Whatever you said or didn't say, whatever's true or not true, none of that changes what happens next." Eli looked up at him, wary, exhausted. the eyes of a child who has been offered escape before and learned that escape is just another room with the door locked from the outside. "What happens next?" the boy asked. "A doctor looks at your leg, tonight, at a hospital, with your uncle nowhere near the room, and then a judge decides where you sleep, not your uncle and not anyone in this diner." "He won't let that happen. He doesn't get a vote," Dale's voice cut across the room. "Excuse me. I have every right to be present during any medical examination of my nephew. I'm his legal guardian." Rachel Voss stood. She walked to the center of the diner and addressed both Dale and Captain Briggs with the controlled authority of a woman who had spent 2 decades navigating the precise intersection of law and violence where children's lives were decided. "Mr. Mercer, under state statute, when a child welfare report has been flagged as urgent and physical evidence of potential abuse is present, DFS has the authority to request a temporary protective hold pending medical evaluation. I'm making that request now." "This is insane. I want my lawyer." "You're entitled to counsel. The child is entitled to a medical evaluation. Those 2 things are not in conflict." Briggs looked at Dale, looked at Rachel, looked at the room full of bikers who hadn't said a word and hadn't needed to. He was making a calculation, the same calculation every person in the diner had made that night, the same calculation the waitress had made and the school nurse had made, and every neighbor who had ever watched Dale Mercer wave from his front yard had made. The cost of involvement versus the comfort of looking away. But the math was different now. The math included 16 men in leather, a formal DFS report, medical records from 3 different hospitals, and a motel key tag sitting on a table in the back booth. "Dale," Briggs said, "let them take the boy to the hospital. Get your lawyer. We'll sort this out properly." Dale's face went through a transformation that lasted less than a second, but contained a lifetime. The smile, the concern, the rehearsed warmth, all of it dissolved, and what remained underneath was something that Reaper recognized from places that had nothing to do with small-town Missouri. The face of a man who has been stripped of his armor and knows it. The face of a man cornered. "Fine," Dale said. The word was flat, dead. "Fine. Take him." He looked at Eli one more time. The boy flinched. Dale walked to the door, opened it, stepped into the rain. His truck started and the headlights swept across the parking lot as he backed out and pulled onto Route 12, the taillights shrinking into the storm until they were gone. Grim watched the truck disappear. His face gave nothing away, but Reaper had known him long enough to read the microtension in his stance. The slight forward lean, the way his weight settled onto the balls of his feet. The posture of a man who knew that a cornered predator was infinitely more dangerous than a comfortable one. "Cass," Grim called toward the door. "Ride with Rachel to the hospital. Stay with the boy." Cass came back inside. His face was rain-soaked and drawn, but his hands were steady again. He looked at Eli and managed something that wasn't quite a smile, but carried the same weight. "Ready to get that cast off, kid?" Eli didn't answer. He slid out of the booth slowly, his broken leg dragging, and stood in the center of the diner looking at the bikers who surrounded him. These men in leather and scars and silence who had appeared out of a storm because someone made a phone call. "He'll come to the hospital," Eli said. Not a question. "He won't get near you," Cass said. "You don't understand." The boy's voice was steady but thin, stretched to its breaking point. "He doesn't come himself. He sends people. He has friends everywhere. The deputy, the school, the emergency room. There's always someone watching for him." The room absorbed that, the full specific horror of a 9-year-old who had mapped his abuser's surveillance network with the precision of a prisoner who has spent years studying the guard rotations. Grim looked at Deacon. A silent exchange, the kind that passes between men who have operated together under conditions where a misunderstood glance can cost a life. Deacon nodded once. "We'll have men at the hospital," Grim said to Eli. "Not inside, outside, in the parking lot, on the street. You won't see them, but they'll be there." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." Eli looked at him the way a man looks at a map of territory he desperately wants to believe in, but has been lied to about before. "People say that," the boy said. "And then they leave." Grim crouched down. Not kneeling, crouching, the combat squat of a man who lowers himself without surrendering his ability to stand. He was eye level with Eli now, and the boy could see the lines in his face, the scars that ran like rivers through terrain that had been reshaped by decades of weather and war. "I'm not people," Grim said. Rachel Voss touched Eli's shoulder, lightly. The boy didn't flinch, not because the fear was gone, but because his body had exhausted its capacity for flinching. He followed her toward the door, limping, the filthy cast dragging across the linoleum, and as he passed Reaper's booth, he stopped. "The motel key," Eli said. "Room 14. He goes there on Thursdays." "We know. There's a lockbox under the bed. I saw it once. He doesn't know I saw it." Reaper looked at Grim. Grim looked at Deacon. "What kind of lockbox?" Deacon asked. "Metal, gray, with a combination lock." The boy paused. "He keeps a gun in the house, in the closet above the water heater, but the lockbox is different. He talks to the person on the phone about the lockbox. He says things are safe because everything's in one place." The air in the diner changed. Not the temperature, something deeper. The molecular structure of the situation rearranging itself around a new piece of information that turned a case of child abuse into something that might be much, much worse. Eli walked out into the rain with Rachel Voss and Cass on either side of him, and the door closed, and the neon light flickered, and the diner was left holding 16 bikers and a silence that hummed like a live wire. Grim stood motionless for 10 full seconds. Then he turned to the room. "Deacon, I need everything you can find on the mother's death. Cause, timeline, insurance status, investigating officer. Everything. Already pulling it. Reaper, Ridgeline Motor Lodge. I need eyes on room 14 tonight. No contact, no entry. Just watch." Reaper stood. His knees ached. The cold always made the old injuries worse. The ones from the road, the ones from the fight, the ones from the years he had spent punishing his body for surviving when others hadn't. He pulled his vest tight and walked to the door. "Reaper." Grim's voice stopped him. "If Dale shows up at that motel tonight, I'll call. You'll call first." The implication landed. Reaper turned, looked at Grim with the flat, steady gaze of a man who understood exactly what was being said and resented the necessity of hearing it. "I said I'll call. And I'm saying call first, not after, not during, before anything else happens. This boy needs a case, not a casualty." Reaper held the look for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he pushed through the door and into the rain. His bike was cold. The engine caught on the second kick, and the sound rolled across the parking lot like distant thunder. He pulled onto Route 12, heading east, the rain hitting his face in horizontal sheets, the headlight carving a tunnel through the darkness. The Ridgeline Motor Lodge was 11 miles out. 11 miles to think about a lockbox under a motel bed and a mother who had died and a boy who had overheard the word natural and understood, at 9 years old, what it meant. Back in the diner, Grim stood at the counter alone. The regulars had left, one by one, slipping out into the rain with the hunched shoulders of people who understood that something had changed in their small corner of the world and would not change back. Lorraine was cleaning the grill. The cook had gone home. Hartwell sat on his stool staring into a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Deacon approached with his phone. His face was different now, harder, older, carrying something that Grim recognized from battlefields. "The mother," Deacon said, "Margaret Mercer, died 14 months ago. Official cause: accidental prescription drug overdose. Oxycodone combined with benzodiazepines, investigated by county sheriff's office. Case closed in 6 weeks. Who signed off?" Deacon looked at Hartwell. Grim followed his gaze. Hartwell felt their eyes. Looked up. The color drained from his face. "The investigating officer," Deacon said, "was Deputy Dennis Hartwell." The coffee cup in Hartwell's hand began to rattle against the saucer. A small, involuntary vibration that traveled up his arm and into his shoulder and settled in the base of his skull, where the truth lives when the body can no longer keep it locked away. "I didn't," Hartwell started. "It was ruled accidental. The coroner signed off. There was no evidence of—" "There's evidence now," Grim said. He pulled the motel key tag from his pocket, set it on the counter between them. The faded plastic caught the neon light, and the room number, 14, glowed like a small, terrible answer to a question that nobody in this county had bothered to ask. Hartwell stared at it. His mouth opened and closed. His hand went to his badge and then dropped away, as if the metal had burned him. "You closed the investigation on a mother's death in 6 weeks," Grimm said. "A mother whose brother-in-law took custody of her son. A brother-in-law who has been breaking that boy's bones ever since. And now there's a motel room with a lockbox that a dead woman's son knows about because he heard his uncle discussing how to make something look natural." Grimm leaned forward. "So here's the question, Deputy, the only question that matters tonight. When you closed that case, was it because you didn't see the evidence or because you chose not to look?" Hartwell's face collapsed, not dramatically, quietly, the way a structure fails when the last supporting beam gives out, a slow internal crumbling that shows on the surface as a kind of terrible stillness. "Didn't know," he whispered. "That's not what I asked." The rain pounded against the windows. The neon flickered. Somewhere on Route 12, a Harley engine growled through the storm toward a motel where a gray metal lockbox sat under a bed in room 14, holding secrets that a dead woman might have taken to her grave if her 9-year-old son hadn't been brave enough to steal a key. Hartwell put both hands flat on the counter. His shoulders dropped. The last resistance left his body like air leaving a tire. "Dale asked me not to dig," Hartwell said. "He said it would traumatize the boy. Reopen the wound. He was so convincing. He cried. He sat in my office and cried about his sister-in-law and how he wanted to protect Eli from more pain." The deputy's voice cracked. "I believed him. I wanted to believe him. It was easier." "Easier," Grimm repeated. Hartwell looked up. His eyes were red. "What happens to me?" Grimm picked up the key tag and placed it back in his vest. "That depends entirely on what you do in the next 12 hours.
But sounds right.
Somewhere east on Route 12, Reaper's headlight found the Ridgeline Motor Lodge, a sagging L-shaped building with a gravel lot and a vacancy sign that buzzed with dying neon. He killed the engine 50 yards back and walked the rest through the rain, his boots sinking into mud, the cold working through his leather like a living thing. Room 14 was at the far end. Dark window, no vehicle in front. He found a position behind a dumpster with a clear sight line to the door and the parking lot entrance. He settled in. Let the rain soak him. Let the cold take root. And waited. At 11:47 p.m., headlights appeared on the access road. A black Ford F250 with mud-caked wheel wells and a cracked taillight pulled into the lot and parked directly in front of room 14. Dale Mercer stepped out. He was carrying a duffel bag. He looked left, looked right, scanned the lot with the methodical precision of a man checking for witnesses. Then he unlocked room 14, stepped inside, and closed the door. Reaper reached for his phone. His thumb found the contact. One ring. "Grimm, he's here. He brought a bag." Silence on the line. Then, "Don't move. I'm calling the state police. Reaper, do not move." The line went dead. Reaper stared at the door of room 14. Behind it, a man was emptying evidence into a duffel bag, destroying the contents of a lockbox that might prove what happened to a dead woman and what was being planned for her living son. 12 hours, Grimm had told Hartwell. That depends on what you do in the next 12 hours. But Dale Mercer wasn't waiting 12 hours. Dale Mercer was in that room right now, and every second that passed was a second of evidence disappearing. Reaper looked at his phone, looked at the door. Then he heard a sound that froze the blood in his arms. From inside room 14, muffled but unmistakable through the thin motel walls, the sound of a paper shredder. And Reaper Cole, Sergeant-at-Arms of Iron Hollow MC, a man who had followed orders in 3 combat zones and promised Grimm he would call first, stood in the rain behind a dumpster and made a choice that would change everything. He put the phone in his pocket and walked toward the door. The door wasn't locked. That was the first thing that registered. The knob turning under Reaper's hand with no resistance, as if Dale Mercer had been in too much of a hurry to bother with the deadbolt, or as if some part of him had already stopped caring about the small precautions that separate a man who is covering his tracks from a man who is running. The room hit him in layers. Smell first. Stale cigarettes, Mildew, the chemical sweetness of air freshener failing to mask something older and more permanent. Then light. A single lamp on the nightstand throwing a weak yellow cone across a bed that hadn't been made, a desk pushed against the wall, and Dale Mercer standing beside it with a portable paper shredder plugged into the wall outlet and a stack of documents in his hand. Dale turned. The two men looked at each other across 8 feet of stained carpet, and in the space between them the room held its breath. "Get out," Dale said. Reaper didn't move. His eyes were on the desk, on the documents, on the gray metal lockbox sitting open beside the shredder, its lid thrown back to reveal a cavity that was half empty. Papers already fed through the machine, their remains curling in the waste bin below like the shed skin of something poisonous. "Put the papers down," Reaper said. "You're trespassing. I'll have you arrested. Call whoever you want. Put the papers down first." Dale's hand tightened on the stack. His eyes moved to the door behind Reaper, measuring, calculating, the same rapid-fire threat assessment that Reaper had watched him perform in the diner. But this was different. In the diner, Dale had been performing for an audience. Here, in a motel room at midnight with no witnesses and no cameras and no deputy to hide behind, the performance had fallen away, and what remained was the raw machinery of a man whose survival instinct had kicked into a gear that civilized behavior could no longer reach. "You don't know what you're walking into," Dale said. His voice had dropped the warmth entirely. What replaced it was something flat and clinical, almost conversational, like a man discussing logistics. "This doesn't involve you. This doesn't involve your club. Walk away and none of this touches you." The boy's already talking. The boy recanted. "You were there." He recanted because you looked at him, because you touched your wrist and he understood the message. But there are 16 men who watched it happen, and every one of them knows what a train signal looks like. Dale set the papers on the desk, not because Reaper had asked, because his hands needed to be free. The shift in his posture was subtle but unmistakable. Weight forward, shoulders squared. The unconscious preparation of a body that has decided the next few seconds will determine everything. "Who are you?" Dale asked. Not the question of a curious man, the question of a man assembling a target profile. "Nobody." "You're not nobody. You're sergeant-at-arms of a motorcycle club that just inserted itself into a custody dispute. That makes you a party. That makes you liable. That makes your entire chapter vulnerable to, I'm a man standing in a motel room watching you destroy evidence related to a dead woman and an abused child. That's all I am right now." Dale's jaw flexed. A vein surfaced at his temple, blue and prominent, pulsing with a heartbeat that had accelerated past the point where composure could disguise it. He was afraid. Reaper could see it. Not on his face, which remained locked in that practiced neutrality, but in the small betrayals of his body. The sweat on his upper lip despite the cold. The slight tremor in his left hand. The way his eyes kept cutting to the lockbox, then back, then to the lockbox again, as if the contents were a wound he needed to cover. "What's in the box?" Reaper asked. "Legal documents, insurance paperwork, my sister-in-law's estate records. Nothing that concerns—" "Then why shred them at midnight in a motel room?" Silence. The shredder hummed on the desk, its motor still running, the green power light glowing like a small, cold eye. Dale reached behind him. The motion was casual, almost lazy. The motion of a man adjusting his shirt, reaching for his back pocket, shifting his weight. But Reaper had spent enough years in enough dark rooms to recognize the geometry of a man reaching for something he doesn't want you to see. "Hands where I can see them." Dale stopped. His hand was behind his back, fingers wrapped around something at his waistline, and the two men stood frozen in a tableau that Reaper had lived through before in different countries with different faces, but always the same essential architecture. Two men, a weapon that may or may not exist, and the 2-second window in which everything is decided. "Bring that hand forward empty," Reaper said, "or bring it forward however you want and find out what happens." Dale's eyes searched Reaper's face for the bluff. They didn't find one. His hand came forward. Empty. But Reaper had seen the outline, the slight bulge at the small of Dale's back, visible now that the man's jacket had shifted. A handgun, compact, tucked into the waistband. "That the same one you keep in the closet above the water heater?" Reaper asked. "Or is that a different one?" Something flickered behind Dale's eyes. The recognition that the boy had told them more than he'd realized. The understanding that the careful compartments of his life, the house, the motel, the lockbox, the gun, the insurance, the smile, were being dismantled by a 9-year-old who had been paying attention from inside his cage. Eli knows everything. That's what you never figured out. You locked him in a garage and thought you were containing him, but you were teaching him. Every conversation you had on the phone, every trip to this motel, every name, every number, every detail, he heard it all. He mapped you. A 9-year-old boy mapped every piece of you, and you never noticed because you were too busy believing that a child in a cage couldn't be dangerous. Dale's composure cracked. It was small. A fissure, not a break. But in that fissure, Reaper saw the true face for the first time. Not the smile, not the coach, not the cookie-baking, yard-waving Lions Club model citizen. The face underneath all of that, tight, calculating, devoid of warmth, the face of a man who had been running equations on other people's lives for so long that he had forgotten those lives were real. "You're making a mistake," Dale said quietly. "A very serious mistake." "I've made worse. Not like this." Dale's voice had changed again. Lower. More controlled. The voice of a man who has stopped performing and started negotiating. "You have no idea what's in this box? No idea what it connects to. You think this is about a boy with a broken leg. You think this is about bruises and a neglected cast and a locked garage. Tell me what it's about." Dale looked at the lockbox, at the papers, at the shredder still humming on the desk, and something moved across his face that Reaper hadn't expected. Not fear, not anger, but resignation. The exhaustion of a man who has been holding too many walls in place for too long and has just felt the last one begin to give. "Margaret didn't die of an overdose," Dale said. The room contracted. Reaper felt the words land in his sternum like a round hitting Kevlar, absorbed, but the impact traveled through his whole body. "What did she die of?" "She died because she found out what I found out. And I handled it wrong. I handled all of it wrong." Dale sat down on the edge of the bed. The motion was sudden, graceless. A man whose legs had decided independently that standing was no longer sustainable. He put his hands on his knees and stared at the carpet between his boots, and Reaper watched the architecture of a monster rearrange itself into something he didn't recognize and didn't trust. "Don't sit there and tell me a story," Reaper said. "I've heard your stories. The whole town has heard your stories. This isn't a story." "Then what is it?" Dale looked up. His eyes were different now. Not the polished warmth, not the cold calculation, but something raw and wounded that Reaper's gut told him to distrust on principle because men like Dale Mercer weaponized vulnerability the way other men weaponized fists. "Margaret was married to my brother, Paul. He died in a construction accident 6 years ago. I-beam failure, 3 men killed, the company settled out of court. Big settlement, 7 figures. Margaret was the beneficiary. I didn't ask about your brother. You need to hear this. After Paul died, Margaret started getting calls from the insurance company's legal team. Not the settlement people, a different division. Internal audit. They were investigating whether the I-beam failure was actually accidental or whether the construction company had falsified inspection reports. Reaper said nothing. He let the silence work. Margaret dug into it. She was smart. Smarter than anyone in this town gave her credit for. She started pulling inspection records, maintenance logs, subcontractor agreements. She found discrepancies, forged signatures, a pattern that went back years. The construction company, Halcyon Industrial, had been using substandard materials on state-funded projects and paying county inspectors to sign off on them. County inspectors. 3 of them, all in the same jurisdiction, all connected to the same network of local officials who approved the contracts. Reaper felt the shape of the thing expanding. What he'd walked into thinking was a child abuse case, a man beating his nephew, a lockbox with insurance papers, was something larger, something with roots that went deeper than a motel room in rural Missouri. Margaret was going to report it, Dale continued. She had documents, physical copies. She'd been collecting them for months, keeping them away from digital records because she didn't trust email, didn't trust cloud storage, Didn't trust anything that someone could delete remotely. The lockbox. Dale nodded. I was supposed to protect them. After she told me what she'd found, she asked me to hold the documents because she was afraid someone had been in her house. Small things. Drawers open, her computer wiped, a window left unlocked that she was certain she'd locked. She was paranoid, I thought. Grieving, unstable. But she wasn't. She was right about everything. 2 weeks after she gave me the documents, she was dead. Oxycodone and benzodiazepines. The coroner called it accidental. Hartwell closed the case in 6 weeks. Dale's voice flattened. And I sat in my kitchen holding a box full of evidence that proved my brother was killed by corporate negligence and my sister-in-law was killed for finding out about it, and I did nothing. Nothing. I was scared. The people she was investigating, they weren't just a construction company. Halcyon Industrial has contracts with the state. Their board includes a former county commissioner, a retired state senator, and the brother-in-law of the sitting prosecutor. Margaret didn't just find corruption. She found the machinery that runs this county. Reaper looked at the shredder, at the half-empty lockbox, at the documents still sitting on the desk. So you took custody of the boy. You took the evidence. And instead of going to the state attorney general or the FBI or anyone who could have done something with it, you hid in this motel room for 14 months and you beat a 9-year-old child. Dale's head came up. I never... 3 ER visits, 2 broken bones, bruises on his wrists, a locked garage, 4 days with a bucket. Don't sit there and tell me you never. The mask tried to come back. Reaper watched it struggle onto Dale's face like a man pulling on a shirt that no longer fits. The smile, the concern, the practiced humanity, but it couldn't hold. The muscles wouldn't cooperate. The face had been worn too thin by the effort of a year spent pretending, and now, in a motel room at midnight with no audience to perform for, the pretending had become physically impossible. I was falling apart, Dale said. The pressure. Holding those documents, knowing what they proved, knowing that the people who killed Margaret knew she had copies somewhere and were looking for them. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't work. I was drinking. And Eli was there. Every day. Looking at me with Margaret's eyes. Asking questions. Always asking questions. He's 9 years old. He found the lockbox, 3 months in. I came home and he was sitting on the motel bed with the documents spread around him, reading them with that face. That same face his mother used to make when she was working through something. And I lost it. I grabbed him. Dale stopped. His hands were shaking. Not the controlled tremor of a man performing distress. The uncontrollable vibration of a body that has run out of mechanisms for containing what's inside it. That was the first time. I told myself it was the pressure, the fear, that I was protecting him by keeping him quiet, because if Halcyon found out the boy knew about the documents, you were protecting yourself. Yes. The word hung in the room like gunpowder waiting for a spark. Reaper stood in the doorway of room 14 with the rain soaking his back and the cold working through his leather and the full weight of what he had just heard settling into his bones like concrete. Not a simple monster. Not the straightforward predator he had profiled in the diner. The smiling abuser, the cookie-baking sociopath, the man who killed for insurance money. Something worse. Something more complicated. A coward. A man who had been given evidence of murder and corporate conspiracy and had responded by collapsing inward, by drinking, by turning his terror and his guilt and his paralysis into violence against the only person in his life who couldn't fight back. Not evil. Broken. And the distinction didn't matter because a 9-year-old boy was in a hospital with a leg that had been broken for 2 months and a body covered in the evidence of what a broken man does when he can't face what he knows. The phone call, Reaper said, the one Eli overheard, about making something look natural. Dale's face went white. A complete drain of color, so sudden and total that Reaper thought for a moment the man was going to pass out. That wasn't me. The boy heard it from your truck. That was a call I received, not one I made. A voice I didn't recognize. They called my cell, a number I've never shared publicly, and they said they knew I had Margaret's documents, and they said if I didn't hand them over, they would make what happened next look natural. A threat. A promise. That's when I moved the lockbox to the motel. That's when I started driving different routes, checking my mirrors, sleeping with the gun. And that's when Dale's voice cracked. That's when Eli became a problem I couldn't solve. Because if they were watching me, they were watching the house. And if they were watching the house, they knew about the boy. And if they knew about the boy, you locked him in the garage to hide him. I locked him in the garage because I was terrified. Because a child who asks questions and explores and finds things that are hidden is a child who could get himself killed. And I didn't know how to protect him except by becoming the thing he needed protection from. Dale said nothing. The shredder hummed. The rain beat against the window. Reaper pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen showed 2 missed calls from Grimm and a text message that read simply, "State Police en route, 20 minutes, do not engage, 20 minutes ago," which meant they were close. "The documents that are left," Reaper said, "what do they prove?" Falsified inspection reports on 6 state projects, forged signatures from 3 county inspectors, a paper trail connecting Halcyon Industrial's CFO to payments made through a shell company that routes back to county officials who approved the contracts, and Margaret's notes, handwritten, dated, connecting the I-beam failure that killed Paul to the same pattern of substandard materials. "You were going to shred all of it." Dale looked at the machine, at his own hands. "I was going to make it stop, all of it, shred the papers, ditch the box, take Eli, and disappear. I have enough in savings to run, with a boy who is currently in state custody at a hospital with DFS standing over him. I know it's over. I knew it was over the moment those bikes pulled into the parking lot." Reaper looked at the lockbox, at the remaining documents, at the shredded remains in the waste bin. Half of Margaret Mercer's evidence was gone, destroyed in the 15 minutes between Dale's arrival and Reaper's entry. Whatever was left might be enough, or it might not, and the portion already destroyed might have been the portion that mattered most. He thought about calling Grimm, telling him what he'd found, letting the process work the way Grimm always insisted it should work, through evidence, through channels, through the machinery of a system that, despite its failures, was the only thing standing between order and the kind of chaos that men like Reaper had seen enough of to last several lifetimes. Then he thought about the boy, the bucket, the 4 days. He picked up the remaining documents from the desk, didn't look at them, placed them back in the lockbox and closed the lid. "You're going to sit on that bed and not move until the state police arrive." "And if I don't?" Reaper looked at him, just looked. The same flat, empty, bottomless look he had given Dale in the diner. The look that carried no threat because the threat was so total and so absolute that articulating it would have diminished it. Dale sat. Reaper took the lockbox to the doorway, stood with his back against the frame, one eye on Dale and one on the parking lot. He pulled out his phone and called Grimm. "I'm in room 14. The silence on the other end was worse than shouting. A full 3 seconds of nothing. The void of a man processing the fact that his sergeant-at-arms had done exactly what he'd been told not to do. "Is he alive?" Grimm asked. "He's sitting on the bed." "Did you touch him?" "No." "What's in the room?" "A lockbox, documents. Half of them are shredded. The other half connects a company called Halcyon Industrial to falsified building inspections, the death of the boy's mother, and a network of county officials who have been approving fraudulent contracts for years." Silence again. Longer this time. "This isn't a child abuse case," Grimm said. "No, it's not." "State police are 4 minutes out. You need to be outside that room when they arrive. Outside with your hands visible, and nothing in them that shouldn't be there." "The lockbox. Leave it in the room. Don't touch the documents. Don't touch the shredder. Don't touch anything else. Get out and stand in the rain and wait." Reaper looked at Dale. The man hadn't moved. He sat on the edge of the bed with his hands on his knees, staring at the floor, and the resignation in his posture was so complete that it had the quality of a physical substance, something you could hold in your hands and feel the weight of. "Grimm." "Yeah." He said someone threatened him, a phone call, an unknown number, told him to hand over the documents or they'd make what happened next look natural. Same phrase the boy overheard. "When?" "Months ago. He's been running since then, sleeping with a gun, driving different routes. The abuse escalated after the threat. He was trying to keep the boy quiet because he was afraid whoever killed Margaret would come for Eli. That doesn't excuse. I know it doesn't. I'm telling you what he said. And you believe him? Reaper watched Dale's hands. The tremor was still there, constant, involuntary, the kind that comes not from a performance, but from a nervous system that has been running on adrenaline and cortisol for so long that the wiring has degraded. I believe he's afraid, Reaper said. I believe the fear is real. What he did with that fear is unforgivable. Get out of the room, now! Reaper set the lockbox on the desk beside the shredder, stepped backward into the rain. The cold hit him like a second skin, and he stood in the gravel lot with his hands at his sides and his phone in his pocket, and his heart doing something it hadn't done since Fallujah, beating not with the steady rhythm of a man in control, but with the arrhythmic stutter of a man who has walked into something bigger than he can hold. Headlights appeared on the access road. 2 vehicles, state police cruisers, moving fast, their light bars dark, but their speed unmistakable. They swung into the lot and stopped in a V formation that blocked the exit, and doors opened, and men in gray uniforms stepped out with the efficient precision of officers who had been briefed on what they were walking into and had decided it was serious enough to arrive in force. The first trooper approached Reaper, young, tense, hand near his sidearm. Are you the one who called this in? My club president called it in, Vince Hollow. I'm the one who's been watching the room. Is the subject inside? Sitting on the bed. He has a handgun in his waistband, small of the back. The trooper's posture changed. He signaled to his partner, and the two of them moved toward room 14 with the controlled urgency of men who understand that the gap between a cooperative subject and a desperate one can close in the time it takes to draw a breath. The door was still open. Reaper heard the commands, clear, professional, carrying the authority that Dale Mercer's smile had never been able to generate on its own. Hands, weapon, floor, now. He didn't watch. He turned his back to the room and stood in the rain and looked at the road. His phone buzzed. Text from Grimm. Hospital, now. The boy is asking for you. The ride back was 11 miles of cold and dark, and the particular kind of silence that fills a man's head when the adrenaline leaves and the thinking begins. His bike cut through the storm, the headlight finding road signs and guardrails, and the occasional pair of animal eyes glowing from the shoulder. And Reaper thought about documents and shell companies and county officials and a construction company called Halcyon Industrial that had killed at least one man with a faulty I-beam and at least one woman with pills, and was apparently willing to kill again to keep the evidence buried. He thought about Dale Mercer, the coward, the abuser, the man who had held proof of murder in his hands for 14 months and responded by destroying himself and a child. He thought about the phone call, the unknown voice. Make it look natural. The same phrase spoken twice, once by the caller to Dale, once by Dale on a phone that Eli had overheard from the back seat of a truck. Had the boy heard his uncle receiving the threat, or had he heard something else? Dale repeating the threat to someone, passing the message along, negotiating, collaborating. Because there was a version of this story in which Dale Mercer was not a coward, but a participant. A man who had joined the conspiracy after the threat, who had agreed to hand over the documents in exchange for safety, who had been shredding them not to run but to comply. A man whose abuse of Eli was not the byproduct of fear, but the deliberate suppression of a witness. Reaper didn't know which version was true, and that uncertainty sat in his chest like a stone. The hospital appeared through the rain, a low complex of fluorescent-lit buildings on the edge of the county seat, its emergency entrance marked by red crosses and the revolving lights of an ambulance idling in the bay. Reaper parked near the far end of the lot, where 3 other Harleys sat in a row, their chrome dulled by rain and their saddlebags locked tight. Cass met him at the entrance. The younger man's face was drawn, hollowed out by hours of fluorescent light and the particular exhaustion that comes from sitting with a traumatized child while the system grinds through its procedures. He won't talk to anyone, Cass said. Rachel's been with him for 2 hours. The doctor did the exam. The leg's bad, Reaper. The bone is healing wrong. They're going to have to re-break it and set it properly. He asked for me? He asked for the man who didn't smile. Something moved in Reaper's chest, deep, in a place he had spent years sealing off with concrete and whiskey and miles of empty highway. They walked through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and old coffee and the particular brand of institutional sadness that clings to hospitals after midnight. The fluorescent hum, the distant beeping, the squeak of rubber soles on polished floors. A trooper stood outside a closed door. Cass nodded at him, and the trooper stepped aside. Eli was in the bed. The filthy cast was gone, replaced by a temporary splint and layers of clean white bandaging that made his small leg look even smaller. He was wearing a hospital gown that hung off his shoulders like a sail on a becalmed mast, and his eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, tracking something that existed only in the landscape of his own exhausted mind. Rachel Voss sat in a chair beside the bed. Her portfolio was closed, her pen was untouched. She looked at Reaper with the expression of a woman who had run out of professional tools and was left with nothing but the raw, inadequate fact of her presence. "He stopped talking an hour ago," she said quietly. "He answered the medical questions. He let the doctor examine him. And then he shut down." Reaper walked to the bed, pulled a chair from the corner, sat down with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who understood that sudden motion was a language this boy didn't want to hear. "Hey, kid." Eli's eyes moved from the ceiling to Reaper's face. The boy studied him. The rain-soaked leather, the wet hair plastered to his forehead, the lines of exhaustion cut into his face like channels in old stone. "You went to the motel," Eli said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." "Did you find the lockbox?" "Yeah." "Did he destroy everything?" "Half. The state police have the other half." Eli absorbed that. His face didn't change. It had moved past the capacity for reactive expression into the fixed neutral territory of a child who is processing information the way a computer processes data, without emotion, because emotion is a circuit that has been overloaded too many times and has finally blown. "My mom collected those papers," the boy said. "She worked on them at the kitchen table after I went to bed. I could hear the printer from my room. She was trying to prove something about how my dad died." Reaper said nothing, waited. "She told me once that my dad didn't die in an accident. She said he died because someone decided his life was worth less than the money they saved by using cheap steel." The boy's voice was steady, but the steadiness was artificial. A construct, a scaffolding built by a 9-year-old mind to support a weight that would have buckled most adults. "And then she died too, and Uncle Dale said it was an accident, and I believed him, for a while." "When did you stop?" "When I found the lockbox. I read the papers. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough. I understood that someone killed my mom because she found out who killed my dad. And I understood that Uncle Dale knew and didn't do anything." The boy turned his head on the pillow and looked at Reaper with eyes that held a darkness no amount of therapy or time or kindness would ever fully reach. The foundational, load-bearing darkness of a child who has learned that the adults responsible for protecting him are either complicit in his destruction or too broken to stop it. "He told you it was about Halcyon, didn't he?" "You know about Halcyon." "I read the papers 6 months ago. I memorized the names." Reaper felt the floor shift beneath him. "What names?" "The inspectors, the company executives, the county officials, the ones my mom wrote in her notebook." Eli paused. "I wrote them down, in a different notebook. And I hid it somewhere Uncle Dale will never find it." "Where?" The boy almost smiled. Not quite. The muscles moved, the intention was there, but the expression couldn't complete itself, arrested by a body that had forgotten how to perform anything except fear and stillness. "You're the only person I've told about the lockbox, about the phone call, about the motel, and you didn't sell me out. So I'll tell you where the notebook is." The boy's eyes held Reaper's with an intensity that belonged to a field commander, not a fourth grader. "But I need something first." "What?" "I need to know that the men on the motorcycles aren't going to disappear. I need to know that when this gets hard, and it's going to get hard, because the people my mom was investigating have enough money to make anything go away, I need to know that someone is going to stay." Reaper looked at this boy. This shattered, brilliant, impossible boy who had survived a locked garage and a broken leg and the murder of both his parents, and had responded not by breaking, but by building, building a map of his enemy's network, building a backup of the evidence, building a survival strategy that rivaled anything Reaper had seen in a combat zone. I can't promise you everything, Reaper said. I can't promise the system works. I can't promise the right people go to jail. I can't even promise you'll be safe tomorrow. Then what can you promise? Reaper leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his scarred hands hanging between them, the rain still dripping from his hair onto the hospital floor. I can promise that every time you look out a window, there will be a Harley parked somewhere you can see it. I can promise that no one gets to you without going through men who don't go down easy. And I can promise that if you give me those names, I will burn every one of them to the ground through the only system that matters. Not fists, not guns, but a courtroom with a federal judge and a jury of 12 people who don't owe Halcyon Industrial a single thing. Eli stared at him, weighing, calculating, running the algorithm that a year of captivity and 2 dead parents had installed in his operating system. The algorithm that measured every person against every betrayal and determined with cold precision the probability that this man, this scarred and rain-soaked biker, would do what he said. The notebook is in the school library, Eli said, taped behind the reference shelf, 3rd row from the bottom, behind the encyclopedia set that nobody uses anymore. Reaper stood. His body ached. The cold, the hours, the weight of what he now carried. He walked to the door. Reaper. He turned. My uncle told you someone threatened him. Someone called and said they'd make it look natural. Yeah. That part is true. I heard the call. But he left something out. The hospital corridor hummed. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Rachel Voss sat motionless in her chair, her pen raised but not writing, her body frozen in the posture of a woman who has realized she is listening to something that will change the scope of every report she has ever filed. The voice on the phone, Eli said. I recognized it. Who was it? The boy's eyes went flat, the shutdown reflex again. But this time it wasn't fear. It was the cold, deliberate control of a child who understands that the next words out of his mouth will detonate something that cannot be reassembled. Captain Briggs, Eli said, the man your president asked to come help. The man who told my uncle to let them take me to the hospital. The man who's standing outside this building right now with a badge and a gun and the authority to make every piece of evidence we have disappear. The room went silent. Reaper looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at Reaper. And somewhere outside the hospital, in the parking lot, in the rain, Captain Briggs sat in his county cruiser with his radio on and his engine running, and the red taillights reflected off the wet asphalt like 2 small eyes watching the entrance, waiting to see who would come through the door and what they would be carrying when they did. Reaper closed the hospital room door with the careful precision of a man sealing a blast chamber. Rachel Voss was on her feet. Her portfolio was pressed against her chest like a shield, and her face had gone through a transformation in the span of 3 seconds. Professional composure to shock to something harder, something that looked like the expression of a woman who had just realized the floor she was standing on was made of glass. Are you sure? She asked Eli. I've heard Captain Briggs's voice at our house. In the kitchen. On the phone with my uncle. I've heard it through the wall of the garage when he came over at night and they thought I was sleeping. The boy's voice was flat, clinical. The voice of a witness who has rehearsed this testimony in the dark for months. He has a laugh, short, like a cough, and he calls my uncle Dale Boy. Nobody else calls him that. Rachel looked at Reaper. The question in her eyes was no longer professional. It was tactical, survival level, the kind of question people ask when they realize the rules they've been operating under no longer apply. If Briggs is connected to Halcyon, she started, then every piece of evidence in this county runs through his office before it reaches anyone who can act on it, Reaper said. The motel room, the lockbox, Dale's arrest, the medical records, all of it. The state police have jurisdiction over... The state police were called by Grimm, who coordinated with Briggs, who is sitting in that parking lot right now with a radio that can reach every officer in this county. The corridor outside was quiet. Too quiet. The trooper who had been standing guard was gone. Not reassigned, not on break, just absent, his post empty, the chair beside the door still warm. Reaper pulled out his phone and called Grimm, The line rang 4 times before connecting, and when Grimm's voice came through, it carried a tension that Reaper had heard only twice before. Once in Helmand, once in a VA parking lot at 3 in the morning. "Where are you?" Grimm asked. "Hospital, Eli's room. We have a problem." "I know." Deacon just pulled the financial records on Halcyon Industrial. 3 of their board members have made donations to the county sheriff's re-election campaign in the last 2 years. One of those board members shares a hunting lease with Briggs. It's worse than that. Briggs made the phone call, the threat. Make it look natural. The boy recognized his voice. The silence that followed was not the processing silence of the diner or the angry silence of the motel call. This was the silence of a man recalculating every move he had made in the last 6 hours and discovering that the board he thought he was playing on had a second layer underneath it. "Briggs is in the parking lot," Grimm said. "I know. He's been there for 20 minutes. He hasn't come inside." "He's waiting." "For what?" Reaper looked at Eli. The boy was sitting up in the hospital bed with his splinted leg extended and his hands flat on the mattress and his eyes locked on the door as if he could see through it to the corridor beyond and the parking lot beyond that, and the man in the cruiser who had been orchestrating his family's destruction from behind a badge. "He's waiting to find out what the boy told us," Reaper said, "and once he knows, once he figures out that we know about his involvement, he's going to move. Not tomorrow, not next week, tonight." "Move how?" "The evidence. Dale's in state police custody, but Briggs has relationships with every law enforcement office in 100 miles. All he needs is one phone call to contaminate the chain of custody on the lockbox. One conversation with the right trooper. One administrative delay that gives his people time to reach the motel room before the contents are properly cataloged." "The lockbox is still at the motel?" "I left it in the room. You told me not to touch anything." "I know what I told you." Another silence. Reaper could hear, faintly, the sound of engines in the background of Grimm's call. Not 1 or 2. Several. The low, idling grumble of Harleys waiting for instructions. "Where are you?" Reaper asked. "Route 12, halfway between the diner and the motel. I have 8 men. The motel has state police on scene. 2 troopers. I watched them arrive. One of them took a phone call 15 minutes ago and walked away from the building. The other is inside with the lockbox." Reaper's hand tightened on the phone. "Who called the trooper?" "I don't know, but I can tell you that after the call he got in his cruiser and left." "Which means one trooper is inside that motel room alone with every piece of physical evidence connecting Halcyon Industrial to 2 deaths and a countywide corruption network. Grimm, I'm not going to the motel. I'm not touching evidence. I'm not giving anyone a reason to claim the Brotherhood compromised the investigation." Grimm's voice was iron, controlled, but beneath the control, Reaper could hear the strain, the particular agony of a man who understands that the rules he lives by are the same rules that his enemies are exploiting. "But I'm going to make one phone call that changes everything, and I need you to keep that boy safe for the next 2 hours. "Who are you calling?" "Someone who doesn't answer to this county." The line went dead. Reaper pocketed his phone, looked at Rachel, looked at the empty corridor outside the door. "We need to move him," Reaper said. Rachel shook her head. "I can't authorize a transfer without—" "The trooper outside this door is gone. Briggs is in the parking lot. And the only thing standing between this boy and the people who killed his parents is a hospital room with a lock I could break with my shoulder." Rachel Voss stared at him. She was a woman who had spent 20 years inside a system, navigating its channels, respecting its boundaries, trusting its infrastructure even when that infrastructure failed. And now she was standing in a room where the infrastructure had not just failed, but had been weaponized against the very person it was designed to protect. And the man asking her to act outside of protocol was a biker with scarred knuckles and a leather vest and a face that looked like it had been assembled from salvaged parts. "Where?" she asked. "The chapter house. Iron Hollow's compound. 12 miles north. Fenced. Gated. Men on the perimeter around the clock." "That's not a state-approved—" "It's a place where no one gets in without going through 16 men who would rather die than let a child be hurt. Pick your system." Rachel looked at Eli. The boy was watching her with the patient, unsurprised expression of a child who had long ago stopped expecting institutions to save him. Please, Eli said. One word. No performance, no manipulation. The raw, unvarnished request of a 9-year-old who had run out of everything except the ability to ask. Rachel closed her eyes. Opened them. I'll need to document this as an emergency relocation under protective authority. She pulled out her phone. And I need to call my supervisor. Call from the car. They moved. Reaper checked the corridor. Empty in both directions, the fluorescent lights humming over polished floors that reflected nothing back. He lifted Eli from the bed. The boy weighed almost nothing, a fact that hit Reaper in the chest like a fist, the physical evidence of months of inadequate food registering in his arms with a specificity that no medical report could match. He could feel the boy's ribs through the hospital gown, could feel the rapid, shallow breathing against his shoulder, could feel the small hands gripping the collar of his leather vest with a strength that seemed impossible for a body that thin. Service exit, Rachel said. East wing. I know the layout. They moved through corridors that smelled like bleach and fear. Past darkened rooms where patients slept. Past a nurse's station where a woman looked up from a chart, registered the biker carrying a child, opened her mouth, and then closed it when Rachel flashed her DFS identification and said protective custody transfer, with the authority of a woman who was making a decision she would either be commended for or fired for, and had accepted both possibilities. The service exit opened onto a loading dock. Cold air hit them. The rain had stopped, replaced by a raw, wet cold that clung to every surface like a film. Reaper's bike was 50 yards away. Rachel's sedan was closer, parked in the staff lot, its windows fogged. Take my car, Rachel said. She handed him the keys. I'll ride with you. Cass follows on his bike. Reaper looked at the parking lot, scanned for Briggs's cruiser. Found it. Still parked near the main entrance, 100 yards to the west, the engine running, the silhouette behind the wheel motionless. He hasn't moved, Reaper said. He doesn't know we're leaving from here. He'll know in 5 minutes. Someone will tell him. A nurse, an orderly, a trooper. He has this county wired. Then we have 5 minutes. Cass appeared at the loading dock, soaked in rain and vibrating with the contained energy of a man who had been waiting for someone to tell him to do something other than sit in a hospital chair watching a child not speak. I heard, Cass said. I'll follow. If anyone tails us, I'll peel off and draw them. No, Reaper said. You stay with the boy. Whatever happens, you stay with the boy. Cass looked at Eli in Reaper's arms. The boy's face was pressed against Reaper's shoulder, his eyes open, watching the parking lot with the vigilance of a creature who has lived so long in danger that the absence of it is more disorienting than its presence. Understood, Cass said. They loaded into Rachel's sedan, Reaper driving, Rachel in the back with Eli, Cass following on his Harley at a distance that was close enough to respond and far enough to see anyone behind them. Reaper pulled out of the staff lot using the service road that ran along the east side of the hospital, away from the main entrance, away from the cruiser, away from the man whose voice a 9-year-old boy had recognized through the wall of a garage. The road was dark. Rural Missouri dark. The kind of darkness that doesn't just surround you but presses against the windows like a physical substance, broken only by the occasional farmhouse porch light or the distant flash of a cell tower. Reaper drove with his lights on low, his eyes on the mirrors, his hands gripping the wheel at 10 and 2 with the automatic precision of a man who has spent decades driving through territory where relaxation was a tactical error. He's asleep, Rachel said from the back seat. Reaper glanced in the mirror. Eli's head had fallen against Rachel's shoulder, and his eyes were closed, and his breathing had slowed to the deep, involuntary rhythm of a body that had surrendered to exhaustion so total that even fear couldn't override it. His small hands were still gripping something, the fabric of Rachel's blazer, twisted between his fingers, held tight even in sleep. How long has it been since he slept? Rachel asked. I don't think he remembers. They drove in silence. The road unspooled ahead of them. Route 9 north, 2 lanes, no streetlights, the center line fading in and out of visibility as the pavement aged. Cass's headlight was a steady point in the mirror, tracking them like a star. Reaper's phone buzzed. Text from Grimm. FBI field office, Springfield contacted. Agent en route. ETA 90 minutes. Stay dark. FBI. Grimm had gone federal. Over the heads of county, over the heads of state police, directly to the one jurisdiction that couldn't be reached by Briggs's network. It was the right call, the only call, but it carried a weight that Reaper felt in his gut. Once the FBI was involved, control left their hands entirely. The Brotherhood would become witnesses, not protectors. The boy would become evidence, not a child. The machinery of federal law enforcement would subsume everything they had done tonight into a process that moved at its own speed and answered to its own logic. And the men in leather who had ridden through a storm because a stranger made a phone call would be reduced to statements taken in fluorescent-lit offices by agents who had never felt the rain. It was the right call. It didn't feel like it. Mile 7. The road curved through a stand of oaks, and as Reaper came around the bend, his headlights caught something that turned his blood to ice. A cruiser, parked across the road, light bar off, engine running, blocking both lanes. Reaper hit the brakes. The sedan slid on the wet pavement, the tires finding purchase 6 feet from the cruiser's front bumper. Behind him, Cass's Harley skidded sideways, the back tire breaking loose before the younger man caught it and brought the bike to a stop at a 45-degree angle. The cruiser's door opened. Captain Briggs stepped out. He was alone. No partner, no backup, no radio visible. He stood in the center of the road with his hat off and his hand resting on his holstered sidearm with the casual familiarity of a man who has drawn it before and is calculating whether tonight requires him to draw it again. "Turn off the engine," Briggs said. Reaper didn't. He sat behind the wheel with his hands visible and his mind running scenarios at a speed that civilian cognition couldn't match. The product of years in places where a wrong decision didn't lead to a bad day, but to a body bag. "Rachel," Reaper said quietly, "is the boy still asleep?" "Yes." "Keep him down. Below the window line." "Reaper." "Do it!" He opened the driver's door and stepped out. The cold hit him. The road was empty in both directions. No traffic, no farmhouses close enough for light, just the 2 vehicles and the man with the badge, and the darkness pressing in from every side. "Captain?" Briggs studied him. The captain's face was different than it had been in the diner. The professional neutrality was gone, replaced by something stripped and essential, the face of a man who has stopped pretending that the next few minutes will follow any rule book. "Where are you taking the boy?" "Protective custody transfer, DFS authorized." "DFS doesn't authorize transfers to motorcycle club compounds." Reaper said nothing. The silence was a confirmation, and Briggs heard it. "I know where Iron Hollow's property is," Briggs said. 12 miles north, fenced. I've driven past it 100 times. You think a fence and a few bikers will stop what's coming?" "Depends on what's coming." Briggs took a step forward. His hand was still on the holster. Not gripping, not drawing, just resting there with the patient weight of a threat that didn't need to be spoken. "You have no idea what you've walked into," Briggs said. "You think this is about a boy and his uncle. You think this is about bruises and a broken leg and a man who should have called for help instead of shutting down. And maybe that's where it started, but it's not where it ends." Halcyon Industrial. Briggs stopped. The name landed between them like a dropped blade. "The boy told you." "The boy told me everything, including the part where the county captain who was supposed to protect him is the same man who called his uncle and threatened to make things look natural." Briggs's face didn't change. Reaper had expected the denial, the smooth, practiced rebuttal, the counter-narrative, the same kind of performance Dale had given in the motel room. But Briggs didn't deny it. He stood in the road in the dark, and he absorbed the accusation the way a building absorbs an earthquake, with visible structural damage, but no collapse. "I've been trying to protect that boy for 8 months, Briggs said, by threatening his uncle, by keeping his uncle scared enough to hold on to the documents instead of handing them to the people who wanted them destroyed. Do you understand what would have happened if Dale had given Halcyon what they wanted? The evidence disappears. Margaret Mercer's death stays an accident. Paul Mercer's death stays an accident. And the same company that kills workers with substandard steel gets another 30 years of state contracts. So you're the hero. I'm not the hero. I'm the man who is too deep inside to get out." The road was silent except for the idling engines and the sound of water dripping from the oak branches overhead. Reaper could hear Cass's Harley behind him, the engine at a low growl, the younger man waiting for a signal. "You're on Halcyon's board," Reaper said. Not a question. "I was on their payroll. 5 years. Monthly deposits into an account in my wife's maiden name. It started with approved construction contracts. Sign off on the inspection waiver, collect the check. Everyone builds their house a little bigger. And then Paul Mercer died. And Margaret started digging, and suddenly the checks came with conditions. Make it go away. Make it go away. Make it look clean. Make sure the investigation doesn't reach the state level. I closed cases. I redirected complaints. I made sure the right people got the right information and the wrong people got nothing." Briggs's voice had gone hoarse. "And then Margaret died. And I knew it wasn't an overdose. I knew because the week before she died, someone from Halcyon's legal team asked me to pull her medical records. And I did it. I pulled them. I gave them her pharmacy history, her prescriptions, her dosage information. And a week later, she was dead." The words hit Reaper like rounds, each one landing with the specific targeted impact of a confession delivered not for absolution, but for the simple, desperate need to stop carrying it. "You helped them kill her." "I gave them the information they needed to kill her, and I have been living with that every day since. And when Dale took custody of the boy, and I realized the documents still existed, I made a choice. Not a good choice. Not a noble choice. A survival choice. I called Dale. I told him to hold on to the evidence because it was the only thing keeping all of us alive. Me, him, and the boy. As long as Halcyon believed the documents might surface, they couldn't move against anyone without risking exposure. Mutually assured destruction. The only kind of safety available to men who have done what I've done." Reaper stared at him. This man, this captain with a badge and a gun, who had facilitated the murder of a mother and was now standing on a dark road explaining his complicity with the clinical precision of a man who has rehearsed this confession in his own head 1,000 times without ever finding an audience willing to hear it. "Move the car," Reaper said. "I can't do that. Move the car or I'll move it for you. Listen to me." Briggs took another step, close now. Close enough that Reaper could see the sweat on his forehead despite the cold, the vein pulsing in his neck, the slight tremor in the hand resting on the holster. "Halcyon has people in the state police. Not many. 1, maybe 2. But 1 is enough. The trooper who left the motel room tonight. He didn't leave because of a phone call from dispatch. He left because someone in Halcyon's network told him to leave. And the lockbox that you left in room 14? It's gone. Collected as evidence. Transferred to a vehicle that is not on any official inventory. It is being driven right now to a location where it will be destroyed, and by morning there will be no physical evidence that Margaret Mercer ever collected anything. The night closed in around Reaper like a fist. The lockbox. Gone. The documents he had held in his hands. The inspection reports, the forged signatures, Margaret's handwritten notes, traveling through the darkness toward annihilation while he stood on a back road arguing with a corrupt captain. "The notebook," Reaper said. Briggs frowned. "What notebook?" "The boy made copies. Handwritten copies. Every name, every date, every connection his mother documented. He hid them." Something changed in Briggs's face. A shift. Subtle. The frown deepened, and his eyes moved past Reaper to the sedan, to the darkened back window where a 9-year-old boy was sleeping against a DFS agent's shoulder, with his hands gripping fabric and his mind holding the last remaining map to a conspiracy that had killed both his parents. "Where?" Briggs asked. Reaper almost laughed. It came out as a sound that was closer to a cough. Short, hard, devoid of humor. "You think I'm going to tell you that? If Halcyon finds that notebook before, they won't find it, because nobody knows where it is except the boy and me. And the boy is going behind a fence with 16 men who would bleed before they'd let anyone touch him." Briggs's hand lifted from the holster, not reaching, releasing, the fingers opening, the arm dropping to his side, the posture of a man who has run out of moves and knows it. "I'm trying to help," Briggs said. "You're trying to survive. There's a difference." "Not from where I'm standing." Behind Reaper, Cass's engine revved, a short, controlled burst. Not a threat, but a signal. Headlights approaching from the south. 2 sets. Moving fast. Reaper turned. The headlights were growing, the vehicles eating the distance with a speed that didn't match civilian traffic at 1 in the morning on a rural Missouri back road. Briggs saw them too. His face changed again. And this time the transformation was unmistakable. Fear. Pure, unfiltered, animal fear that wiped away the confession and the calculation and the rehearsed vulnerability and left nothing but the wide-eyed recognition of a man who has just realized that the machinery he thought he was operating has turned around and is coming for him. "That's not my people," Briggs said. "Whose people? Move. Now. Get off this road." The headlights were a quarter-mile out, closing. Reaper could hear the engines now. Not Harleys, not cruisers, SUVs heavy. The sound of large vehicles driven hard on wet pavement. He didn't wait for Briggs to move the cruiser. He turned, sprinted to Rachel's sedan, threw himself behind the wheel. "Hold the boy." "Reaper, what?" "Hold him." He cranked the wheel left. The sedan's tires screamed on the wet road as he swung around the cruiser's front end, the right wheels dropping off the pavement onto the gravel shoulder. The undercarriage scraping as the car bounced through the drainage ditch and back onto the asphalt on the other side. Cass was already moving, his Harley banking hard, following the sedan through the gap, the engine roaring as he accelerated to match Reaper's speed. In the mirror, Reaper saw the SUVs reach Briggs's cruiser. They didn't stop. They didn't slow. The first one swung around the cruiser the same way Reaper had, and the second followed, and then both sets of headlights were in his mirror, gaining. Briggs was standing in the road behind them, getting smaller. A man in a uniform on a dark road watching the consequences of 5 years of corruption accelerate past him at 70 miles an hour. "Who is that?" Rachel asked. Her voice was steady, professional. The voice of a woman who has decided that panic is a luxury she cannot afford. "Halcyon's people. Briggs said they have assets in the state police. If they know the lockbox evidence is gone, they know the only remaining copy is the boy." Eli was awake. The noise had pulled him out of sleep, and he was sitting up with his back against the seat, and his eyes wide and his body locked into the survival posture that Reaper had first seen in the diner. Shoulders up, chin down, hands gripping whatever was closest. "They're coming for me," the boy said. Not a question. "They're not getting you." The road ahead was straight for a mile, then curved hard to the left through another stand of oaks before opening onto the stretch that led to Iron Hollow's property. Reaper had driven this road 100 times. He knew every curve, every rise, every section where the pavement degraded and the shoulder dropped off into farmland. "Call Grimm," he told Rachel. "His number's in my phone." He tossed it into the back seat. Rachel caught it one-handed without looking, a reflex that spoke to a life of fielding emergencies under imperfect conditions. "Grimm, it's Rachel Voss, DFS. We're northbound on Route 9, 4 miles from your compound. 2 SUVs in pursuit. We have the boy." Reaper couldn't hear Grimm's response, but he heard Rachel's breathing change, a sharp intake, a held beat, then an exhale that carried the quality of someone who has just been told something that fundamentally altered their assessment of the situation. "He says the gate will be open. He says don't stop for anything." The SUVs were closer now. Their headlights filled the mirror, washing the interior of the sedan with white light that made Eli squint and turn his face away. The boy's hand found Reaper's shoulder, reaching forward from the back seat, small fingers gripping the leather, holding on. "Faster," Eli said. Reaper pushed the sedan to 90. The engine screamed. The tires found every imperfection in the road and transmitted it through the steering column into his hands, and the night outside the windows became a blur of black and darker black, broken only by the reflected white of the headlights behind them. Cass was beside them now, his Harley running parallel in the oncoming lane, the engine at full roar, his body low over the tank in the combat riding position that stripped every unnecessary movement and left nothing but speed and direction. He looked at Reaper through the sedan's window, a single nod. Then he dropped back. Reaper saw it in the mirror. Cass falling behind the sedan, positioning his Harley between the car and the pursuing SUVs, putting himself, his body, his bike, his life in the gap. "Cass, no!" Reaper started, but the words were lost in the sound of engines and wind and the particular roar of a Harley being pushed past every limit its manufacturer had intended. The SUVs split. One stayed behind Cass. The other swung wide, accelerating into the oncoming lane to pass on the left, trying to pull alongside the sedan. Reaper watched it come. The SUV was a black Suburban with tinted windows and no plates. The kind of vehicle that existed in the space between corporate security and something darker, something that wore a suit during the day and drove unmarked on back roads at night. It pulled even with the sedan. The passenger window was down. A face appeared. Male, 30s, sharp-featured, wearing the flat expression of a man performing a task he has performed before and expects to perform again. He held up a badge. Federal. Or something that looked federal in the half-second Reaper had to assess it. "Pull over!" the man shouted. "Federal authority!" Reaper looked at the badge, looked at the face, looked at the SUV with no plates. "Rachel." "I see it. Is that real?" No federal agent pursues a DFS vehicle at 90 miles an hour on a back road without coordination. That's not protocol. That's not any protocol. Reaper didn't pull over. The Suburban surged forward, cutting in front of the sedan, and brake lights flared red as the driver slammed the brakes. Reaper wrenched the wheel right. The sedan left the road. The tires hit gravel, then grass, then the rough surface of a farm access track that ran parallel to Route 9 behind a line of fence posts. The car bounced and shuddered, the suspension bottoming out, the undercarriage throwing sparks as metal hit stone. Eli was thrown against Rachel. She wrapped both arms around him. A reflex. Instant. The universal geometry of an adult body shielding a child, and held on as the sedan bucked across the field. Reaper could see the compound, a quarter-mile ahead. The chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The gate, open, as Grimm had promised, the light from the main building spilling across the gravel yard. And in front of the gate, lined up in a formation that blocked every approach except the one Reaper was currently driving, a row of Harleys. 16 of them. Engines running, headlights on, men in leather standing beside them with the patient, immovable posture of a wall that has been built to absorb impact. The Suburban was behind them now, back on the road, decelerating. The second SUV had fallen back. Cass's Harley was weaving across both lanes behind it, making it impossible to pass, buying seconds that felt like hours. Reaper aimed for the gate. The sedan hit the gravel yard at 50 miles an hour, the tires chewing stone, the car fishtailing before he brought it under control and slid to a stop 20 feet inside the fence line. Grimm was there, standing beside his bike with his arms crossed and his face carrying the expression of a man who has been waiting for this moment with the terrible patience of someone who knows that waiting is sometimes the hardest form of action. "Close the gate," Grimm said. Two men moved. The chain-link gate swung shut with a sound that rang across the yard like a bell. A padlock engaged, a chain wrapped, and behind the fence on Route 9, the two Suburbans sat idling at the edge of the property, their headlights illuminating the razor wire and the row of Harleys, and the men who stood between them and a 9-year-old boy who held the last surviving map to their destruction. Reaper opened the car door. His legs didn't want to work. The adrenaline was draining out of him with the nauseating speed of a tank being emptied, leaving behind the tremors and the ache and the specific kind of exhaustion that follows sustained terror. He got Eli out of the back seat, carried him. The boy was shaking, not the controlled tremor of the diner or the shut-down stillness of the hospital, but the full-body, involuntary shaking of a child whose nervous system had been pushed past every threshold it was designed to handle, and was now operating on nothing but the biological imperative to keep the heart beating. "Inside," Grimm said. The chapter house was a converted industrial building, cinder block and steel, originally a machine shop, rebuilt over the years into something that was part meeting hall, part armory, part home for men who didn't have homes anywhere else. The interior smelled like motor oil and wood smoke and the particular blend of leather and sweat and coffee that permeated every surface of every space the Brotherhood inhabited. Reaper carried Eli to a couch in the back room, set him down, covered him with a blanket that someone had pulled from a shelf. Wool, military surplus, rough but warm. "Cass?" Reaper asked. Grim was at the window, looking out at the fence line, at the Suburbans still sitting on the road. Cass is fine. He pulled off into Delancey's property half a mile back. He's circling around. The SUVs. They're not moving. They're waiting. For what? Daylight, lawyers, a warrant, something that gives them legal cover to come through that gate. Grim turned from the window. Or they're waiting for us to make a mistake. Step outside the fence. Give them a confrontation they can use to make us the story instead of them. Reaper looked at Eli. The boy was curled under the blanket with his eyes open, watching the room, cataloging exits and faces and distances with the same methodical precision he had used to map his uncle's network. Even now, exhausted, terrified, shaking under a military blanket in a building full of strangers, the boy was working, processing, surviving. The FBI, Reaper said. How long? 45 minutes. Agent named Reina Torres. Field Office, Springfield. Deacon spoke to her directly. She's been building a case on Halcyon's construction fraud for 11 months, but couldn't get enough physical evidence to move. The notebook changes that. The notebook is still in the school library. I know. And so does everyone in this room, which means it needs to be in our hands before sunrise, because when those SUVs out there report back to Halcyon that the boy is behind our fence, the first thing they're going to do is figure out what else he knows and where he might have hidden it. The school is locked. Deacon is handling it. Reaper looked at Grim. Really looked. At the lines in his face, at the gray in his hair, at the way his hands rested at his sides with the deceptive stillness of a man whose body was capable of violence but whose mind had chosen, deliberately and at great cost, to pursue something harder. This started with a grilled cheese sandwich, Reaper said. Grim almost smiled. The muscles moved. The intention was there. But like Eli in the hospital, the expression couldn't complete itself, arrested by the weight of a night that had turned a simple act of kindness into a war. It started before that, Grim said. It started with a 9-year-old kid who was brave enough to walk 3 miles on a broken leg because every adult in his life had failed him. He paused. And it ends when the last one of those adults is held accountable. Outside, the Suburban's engines still idled. Their headlights still cut across the fence. The men of Iron Hollow still stood in the yard, silhouettes against the light, their breath fogging in the cold air, their boots planted in gravel that had been worn smooth by decades of men standing exactly like this, waiting, watching, holding a line that no one had drawn except the one they had chosen for themselves. Reaper's phone buzzed in Rachel's hand. She passed it forward. Text from Deacon. At the school, library access in 5. Also, pulled Briggs's phone records. He made 14 calls to Halcyon's CFO in the last month, all from a burner. And one more thing. The medical examiner who signed Margaret Mercer's death certificate? He resigned 6 weeks later, moved out of state. Currently living in a house that was purchased in cash by a shell company registered to the same address as Halcyon's legal counsel. Reaper read the message twice, let the architecture of it assemble in his mind. The medical examiner bought and relocated. The death certificate, forged or coerced. The chain of complicity stretching from a motel room to a county captain to a corporate boardroom, every link designed to hold the weight of 2 murders and the silence of a town that had chosen comfort over truth. He looked at Eli. The boy's eyes were still open, still watching, still working. The notebook, Eli said. Did they get it? 5 minutes. The name's in it. There's one I didn't tell you about. Reaper crouched beside the couch, eye level with the boy. The blanket was pulled up to Eli's chin, and his face floated above it like something small and fragile set adrift on rough water. My mom had a contact, someone inside Halcyon, someone who was feeding her information. She wrote his name in the back of the notebook with a star next to it. She called him her insurance policy. The boy's voice was barely a whisper. She told me once, if anything ever happens to me, find the man with the star. He has copies of everything. What's the name? Eli's eyes moved to the window, to the headlights beyond the fence, to the vehicles full of men sent by a company that had killed his father with cheap steel and his mother with pills, and was now parked outside a biker compound trying to get to a 9-year-old boy who had spent a year in a cage memorizing their secrets. "It's in the notebook," Eli said. "But Reaper, when they find that name, those men out there are going to stop waiting, because the man with the star isn't some low-level employee. He's someone they trusted, someone high enough to know everything. And when Halcyon realizes he's been feeding evidence to a dead woman's son through a notebook hidden in a school library," the boy's eyes came back to Reaper. Brown, too large, ancient. "They won't send SUVs next time," Eli whispered. "They'll send everything." Reaper's phone buzzed one final time. Deacon. 2 words. Got it. And outside the fence, as if the notification had been broadcast on a frequency that machines and men could both receive, the Suburban's headlights went dark. Both vehicles. Simultaneously. The engines cut. The road went silent. And in the sudden, absolute darkness beyond the razor wire, Reaper heard a sound that made every man in the yard reach for something. Not weapons, because Iron Hollow didn't carry weapons, but for each other. Shoulders touching shoulders, boots shifting closer. The unconscious primal geometry of men forming a wall. More engines. Not 2, not 4. A convoy. Coming from the south. The sound growing, building, filling the night with the low diesel rumble of heavy vehicles moving in formation. And Reaper stood at the window of the chapter house, holding a phone with 2 words on the screen, and a boy behind him wrapped in a military blanket, and an FBI agent 45 minutes away, and a notebook with a starred name in Deacon's hand somewhere in the dark. And he understood with the cold clarity of a man who has been in war that the next 45 minutes would determine whether any of it mattered. The first headlight crested the hill. The headlights that crested the hill did not belong to Halcyon. They belonged to Harley's. Reaper saw the formation before he heard the engines. A staggered column of headlights cutting through the dark in pairs. The unmistakable geometry of a motorcycle convoy running at road speed with discipline and purpose. 8 bikes. Then 12. Then more behind them, the column stretching back along Route 9 like a lit fuse burning toward the compound. Grim was at the gate, his hand on the chain, his face unreadable in the wash of approaching light. "Who?" Reaper asked from the doorway. "Every chapter within 100 miles. Grim's voice carried the flat calm of a man who had made phone calls he rarely made and received answers he had earned over decades. "Stone Ridge, Black Creek, the Ironside boys from across the state line. I put the word out an hour ago, told them what we were holding, told them what was parked outside our fence." The first bikes reached the compound. They didn't enter. They lined the road. Both sides. Engine after engine killing to silence as riders dismounted and stood beside their machines in the dark, forming a corridor of leather and chrome that stretched from the compound gate back toward the hill where the Halcyon SUVs sat in the darkness. 43 motorcycles. Reaper counted them from the window. 43 men in leather standing on a back road in rural Missouri at 2 in the morning because a phone call had traveled through a network built not on contracts or corruption, but on the simple, unshakable architecture of men who had served together, bled together, buried each other's dead, and agreed a long time ago that when one chapter called, the others came. The Halcyon Suburbans did not move. Their engines stayed off. Their headlights stayed dark. And in the silence that followed the last Harley's engine dying, Reaper imagined the men inside those vehicles making the same calculation that Dale Mercer had made in the diner, the mathematics of power, the cold arithmetic of force, and arriving at a number that no longer worked in their favor. One of the Suburbans started, then the other. Their headlights came on, not pointed at the compound but aimed south, back toward the county seat, back toward the offices and the boardrooms and the shell companies where the kind of power they wielded lived and breathed. They pulled U-turns, slow, deliberate, the heavy vehicles swinging through the gravel shoulder and straightening onto Route 9 southbound. They passed through the corridor of bikers like a funeral procession passing through mourners, observed, measured, remembered. Every license plate that should have been there and wasn't. Every face behind tinted glass that would never be identified. Every detail filed away by men who understood that tonight's retreat was not a victory, but a pause. The Suburbans disappeared over the hill. Grim exhaled. It was the first time Reaper had seen the man release a breath he had been holding, and the sound of it, long, controlled, carrying 14 hours of sustained tension, was more human than anything Grimm had shown all night. "It's not over," Grimm said. "I know. Those men will be back with lawyers and warrants and a public narrative that makes us the criminals and Halcyon the victim. That's how this works. That's how it always works. I know. So we do this right. From this moment forward, every step is documented, every conversation recorded, every decision made through counsel." Grimm looked at the road where the Suburbans had been. "Deacon has the notebook. The FBI is 30 minutes out. And when Agent Torres arrives, we hand her everything. The notebook, the medical records, Briggs's phone logs, the waitress's testimony, the boy's statement, and we step back. Step back. This isn't our war to finish, Reaper. It's our war to start. The finishing belongs to a courtroom." Reaper stood in the doorway of the chapter house and felt the truth of that settle into him, like cold water. The hardest lesson the Brotherhood had taught him, harder than combat, harder than sobriety, harder than the 1,000 small daily acts of discipline that kept a man like him upright, was that protection didn't always look like standing between danger and the thing you were protecting. Sometimes it looked like stepping aside, handing the evidence to someone with the authority to use it, trusting a system you had every reason not to trust because the alternative, becoming the system, replacing law with loyalty, substituting justice with vengeance, was a road that led to a place indistinguishable from the one you were fighting against. He went back inside. Eli was still on the couch, the military blanket pulled tight, his eyes tracking the room with diminishing intensity. The adrenaline was leaving the boy the same way it was leaving Reaper. In waves, each wave taking something with it, leaving behind the raw, tender exhaustion of a body that has run on fear for so long that the absence of fear feels like illness. "They're gone," Reaper said. "For now." "For now, yeah." "What happens when they come back?" Reaper sat on the floor beside the couch, not in a chair. On the floor, his back against the cinder block wall, his legs stretched out, his boots leaving muddy tracks on the concrete. He was at eye level with the boy, equal. The geometry of a man who had decided that looking down at this child was something he would never do again. "When they come back," Reaper said, "they'll come with lawyers. And we'll have lawyers too, and the FBI will have the notebook, and a federal judge will have a warrant, and the men who killed your mom and your dad will stand in a courtroom and answer for it in front of 12 people who don't owe them anything. That works? Sometimes. And when it doesn't?" Reaper looked at his hands, the scarred knuckles, the calluses, the roadmap of a life spent doing things the hard way because the hard way was the only way he knew. "When it doesn't, we try again, and again, until it does." Eli was quiet for a long time. His breathing slowed, his grip on the blanket loosened, and Reaper watched the boy's body do something it probably hadn't done in months. Relax. Not completely. Not the boneless surrender of a child falling asleep in safety, but a partial release, a loosening of the cables, the first tentative step of a nervous system inching back from the edge it had been living on. "I'm tired," Eli said. "I know, kid. I mean really tired, the kind where you can't remember what not tired feels like. I know that kind." Eli's eyes searched Reaper's face, looking for something, finding it or not finding it. Reaper couldn't tell. "Will you stay here? While I sleep?" "Yeah." "On the floor?" "On the floor." The boy closed his eyes. His breathing changed, lengthened, deepened, the rhythm shifting from the shallow, rapid cycle of vigilance to something slower and older and more fundamental. Sleep. Real sleep. The kind that comes not from exhaustion alone, but from the body's decision, made at a level below conscious thought, that the immediate environment is safe enough to shut down. Reaper sat on the floor and listened to the boy breathe and did not move. Agent Reyna Torres arrived at 3:47 a.m. in a black government sedan, followed by 2 additional vehicles carrying a 4-person evidence team and a federal prosecutor named Whitfield, who had been pulled out of bed and driven 90 miles and still managed to look like a man who had been expecting this call for a very long time. Torres was small, dark-haired, mid-40s. She moved through the compound with the quiet efficiency of a person who had spent her career entering spaces where she was not welcome and extracting truths that powerful men had spent fortunes to bury. She shook Grimm's hand, looked at the row of Harleys lining the road, counted the bikers still standing in the yard. "You brought an army," she said. "We brought witnesses," Grimm replied. They set up in the chapter house's main room. A folding table, laptops, recording equipment. The evidence team began cataloging everything Deacon had assembled: the medical records, the phone logs, the DFS report, Lorraine's preliminary written statement, and the notebook. The notebook, which Deacon had retrieved from behind an encyclopedia set on the third shelf of a school library, was a composition book with a marbled black and white cover, the kind sold in grocery stores for $2. And inside it, in the careful handwriting of a 9-year-old boy who had copied his mother's research with the painstaking dedication of a child who understood that what he was preserving was the only thing standing between his family's truth and its erasure, were 47 pages of names, dates, inspection numbers, payment amounts, and a single name on the last page circled with a star. Torres opened the notebook to that page, read the name, looked at Whitfield. Whitfield looked at the name and sat down slowly, the way a man sits when his legs have made a decision his mind hasn't caught up with. "That's Halcyon's CEO, Whitfield said. "He was Margaret Mercer's source," Torres said. "Inside man, feeding her documents, which means the company's own chief executive was building a case against his own board. And they found out. And they killed her to stop it." Torres closed the notebook. She looked at Grimm. "I need the boy's statement, recorded, with a child advocate present." "Rachel Voss is DFS. She's been with him all night." "She'll do, but not tonight. He needs to sleep. We'll take the statement in the morning at our field office with proper protocol." Torres paused. "The men outside, the ones in the SUVs. Did anyone get plates?" "No plates to get. They were scrubbed." "But you have descriptions, vehicle makes, headlight configurations, anything that puts specific vehicles on this road at a specific time. We have 43 men who watched them leave, every one of them willing to testify." Torres looked at the bikers through the window. The men were still standing in the yard, some smoking, some talking in low voices, some simply standing with their hands in their pockets and their faces turned toward the road, maintaining a watch that no one had asked them to maintain because no one had needed to. "This is going to be a long case," Torres said. "Federal grand jury, multiple jurisdictions. Halcyon will fight with every resource they have, and they have substantial resources. The company's legal team will attack the evidence chain, discredit witnesses, file motions to suppress. This notebook," she held it up, "this notebook is the foundation. But foundations get attacked. It's going to take months, maybe a year." "We're not going anywhere," Grimm said. Torres studied him. The lines in his face, the patches on his vest, the quiet authority of a man who had spent his life being misjudged by people who saw the leather and the tattoos and never looked deeper. "You understand that the Brotherhood's involvement will be scrutinized. Your records, your finances, your members' histories, everything that can be used to undermine your credibility will be used." "We've been scrutinized before. Not like this." Grimm nodded. "Not like this, but the answer's the same. We stood in a diner tonight because a boy needed help. We rode through a storm because a man made a phone call. We stood in a yard because someone had to stand between that boy and the people who killed his parents. You can scrutinize that all you want. The story doesn't change." Torres almost smiled. Didn't. But the muscles moved, and the intention lived in the space where the expression would have been. "Keep the boy safe tonight. My team will be back at 8 a.m. And Mr. Hollow, thank you for the call." "Don't thank me. Thank the man who let a kid sit at his table." Torres left. Whitfield followed. The evidence team packed the notebook into a sealed container, signed the chain of custody form that Deacon had prepared with the thoroughness of a man who understood that a missed signature could unravel a federal case, and loaded their vehicles. The compound settled into the quiet that follows a storm, not peaceful, but emptied. Drained of the kinetic energy that had filled it for hours, left with nothing but the low murmur of men talking, the occasional clink of a coffee mug, and the distant sound of the first birds beginning to test the darkness for signs of dawn. Reaper was still on the floor beside Eli's couch. His back ached, his knees throbbed, his hands were stiff with cold, and the leather of his vest had dried into a shape that conformed to his body the way a scar conforms to a wound, permanently, uncomfortably, but with a kind of honesty that comfort couldn't match. Cass appeared in the doorway. He had made it back an hour ago, his Harley running on fumes, his face carrying the particular expression of a man who had done something reckless and was not yet sure whether to be proud or ashamed. "You put yourself between two SUVs and a sedan going 90, Reaper said. "Seemed like the thing to do." It was stupid. "Yeah." "Don't do it again." Cass looked at Eli sleeping on the couch, at the small body under the military blanket, at the face that had finally, after hours of hypervigilance, gone slack with the abandon of real rest. "I'd do it again," Cass said quietly. "Every time." Reaper didn't argue. There was nothing to argue with. The truth of it sat between them like a shared scar. The understanding that some things, once done, become part of the architecture of a man's identity, load-bearing structures that cannot be removed without bringing down everything they support. Morning came slowly, gray light pressing against the compound windows, turning the cinder block walls from black to charcoal to the dull pewter of a Missouri winter dawn. The bikers from the other chapters had drifted away in ones and twos during the small hours, their engines rumbling down Route 9 like a retreating tide, leaving behind the core of Iron Hollow. Grim, Reaper, Deacon, Cass, and the handful of men who had been in the diner when it all started. Lorraine arrived at 6 a.m. She drove a rusted Corolla with a cracked windshield, and she parked outside the compound gate with the engine still running for a full 3 minutes before she turned it off and got out. She was carrying a cardboard box. "I called in sick to the diner," she told Grim at the gate. "First time in 12 years. "What's in the box?" "Coffee, sandwiches, the good bread, not the stuff we serve." She looked at the compound, the fence, the razor wire, the Harleys, the men in leather standing in the yard. "Is the boy here?" "He's sleeping." "Good, he should sleep. He hasn't slept in—" Her voice broke. She set the box on the ground and pressed both hands against her face and stood like that for a moment, a woman in a diner apron on a gravel road at dawn, holding herself together with the pressure of her own palms. "I should have said something sooner," she said through her hands. Grim picked up the box. "You said something last night. That's when it counted." Lorraine dropped her hands. Her eyes were red, but her jaw was set in the way of a woman who has made a decision and will not unmake it. "The FBI agent, Torres. She said she might need me to testify." "She will need you to testify." "Dale knows where I live. He knows where I work. He knows—" "Dale is in state police custody, and the people behind Dale are about to have problems large enough that a waitress in a diner will be the last thing on their minds." Grim paused. "But if you're afraid, we can help with that too." "How?" "The same way we helped the boy, by being there." Lorraine looked at him, at this gray-haired man in a leather vest with a Reaper skull on the back, standing in the cold with a box of sandwiches, offering protection with the same matter-of-fact simplicity that another man might offer directions. "Okay," she said. She got in her car and drove away. The Corolla's taillights disappeared down Route 9, and Grim carried the box inside, and the coffee was hot, and the bread was good, and the men of Iron Hollow sat in their chapter house at dawn and ate in the particular silence of people who have been through something together and don't yet have the words for what it was. Eli woke at 7. He opened his eyes and saw the cinder block ceiling and the fluorescent lights, and Reaper sitting on the floor beside him with a coffee mug in his scarred hands. And for a moment, a single, fractured moment, the boy's face carried the expression of someone who doesn't recognize where he is and is afraid. Then the recognition came. The room, the blanket, the man on the floor, and the fear drained away, replaced by something quieter and more tentative, the fragile, suspicious beginning of safety. "Morning," Reaper said. "Is it over?" "The hard part, not the long part." Eli sat up. His splinted leg extended stiffly under the blanket, and he winced as the movement sent pain through whatever the hospital had given him that was wearing off. He looked around the room, at the motorcycle parts on shelves, the photographs on walls, the long wooden table scarred with decades of use. "This is where you live?" "Some of us, sometimes." "It smells like a garage." "It was a garage. Before it was this." "What is it now?" Reaper looked around the room, at the coffee mugs, at the men in leather eating sandwiches, at Grimm reviewing documents with Deacon, at Cass asleep in a chair with his head tilted back and his mouth open and his hands finally still. "Home," Reaper said, "for the guys who needed one." Eli absorbed that. His eyes moved from face to face, reading each man the way he had read every adult since his mother died, with the cautious, penetrating assessment of a child who had learned that the distance between a smile and a fist was shorter than most people believed. "They stayed all night," the boy said. "Yeah. For me. For you." Eli's lower lip trembled. Just once. The same single tremor that Reaper had seen in the diner, the same crack in the dam that the boy had sealed immediately with the practiced reflexes of someone who had been punished for showing weakness. But this time, the seal didn't hold. The tremor became a second tremor, and the second became a third, and then the boy's face crumpled. Not dramatically, not with sound, but with the slow, silent collapse of a structure that has been holding weight far beyond its capacity for far too long, and has finally, in the presence of something solid enough to catch it, allowed itself to fall. He didn't cry the way children cry in movies, with sobs and volume and the dramatic release of clearly defined emotion. He cried the way children cry when they have forgotten what crying is for, silently, with his whole body, tears running down a face that had lost the muscle memory for the expression and was relearning it in real time. Reaper set down his coffee. He didn't reach for the boy, didn't pull him into an embrace, didn't say it's okay or you're safe now, or any of the things that adults say to crying children because the words make the adults feel better, not the children. He sat on the floor and he waited. And after a while, Eli's hand found his shoulder. Small fingers gripping leather, holding on. They stayed like that until the crying stopped. The weeks that followed moved with the grinding, inexorable momentum of federal machinery set in motion. Agent Torres executed search warrants on Halcyon Industrial's corporate offices on a Tuesday morning, accompanied by 18 agents and a forensic accounting team that would spend the next 4 months dismantling a financial structure designed to hide the flow of money from substandard construction contracts through shell companies and into the pockets of county officials. The CEO, the man whose name Eli had circled with a star, cooperated. He had been waiting, Torres told Grimm later. Waiting for someone to come. Waiting for the evidence Margaret Mercer had gathered to surface in the hands of someone who could use it. He had been feeding her information for 2 years, and when she died, he had assumed the documents died with her. He had spent 14 months inside a company he knew was criminal, unable to act, unable to leave, carrying the specific guilt of a man who had tried to do the right thing and watched it cost someone else her life. Captain Briggs was arrested on a Thursday. He surrendered his badge in his office at the county seat, and the photograph that appeared in the regional newspaper the following day showed a man who looked 20 years older than the one who had stood on a dark road offering confessions and warnings in the same breath. He was charged with obstruction, conspiracy, and accessory to homicide. His cooperation, provided in exchange for a reduced sentence, filled 73 pages of testimony that connected Halcyon's board to the deaths of Paul and Margaret Mercer and the systematic corruption of county inspection processes spanning nearly a decade. Dale Mercer pleaded guilty to child abuse charges and was sentenced to 12 years. In his allocution, he said nothing about Halcyon, nothing about the lockbox, nothing about the year he had spent destroying himself and his nephew. He said only that he was sorry, and the courtroom absorbed the word the way a desert absorbs rain, completely, silently, without any evidence that it had made a difference. Hartwell resigned from the county sheriff's office and testified for the prosecution. His testimony was halting, incomplete, delivered in the fractured cadence of a man excavating memories he had spent years burying. He described the phone calls from Dale, the closed investigation, the decision to stop looking because looking was harder than not looking. He did not ask for sympathy. None was offered. Lorraine testified on a Wednesday afternoon. She wore a blue dress she had bought specifically for the occasion, and she spoke clearly, and her hands did not shake. And when the defense attorney asked her why she had waited so long to report what she had seen, she looked at the jury and said, "Because I was afraid. And because being afraid was easier than being brave, and I will carry that for the rest of my life." 3 Halcyon board members were indicted. 2 of them fled the jurisdiction and were apprehended at an airport. The third turned himself in after his wife, who had read the newspaper coverage and recognized the pattern of lies she had been living inside for years, called the FBI tip line from their kitchen phone at 6 in the morning. The medical examiner who had signed Margaret Mercer's death certificate was extradited from his new home and charged with falsifying an official document in conspiracy. The house he lived in, purchased in cash by a shell company registered to Halcyon's legal counsel, was seized as evidence of the payment structure that had been used to buy silence throughout the county. Through all of it, the boy waited, not passively. Eli Mercer did not do anything passively. He gave his statement to Torres in a room with soft chairs and a child advocate and Rachel Voss sitting beside him, and he spoke for 4 hours with the precise, exhaustive recall of a child who had memorized his own survival the way other children memorized multiplication tables. He identified voices. He described dates. He drew a map of his uncle's house from memory, marking the garage, the closet above the water heater, the bedroom where he had listened through walls, and the back seat of the truck where he had overheard the phone call that started everything. Torres told Grimm afterward that it was the most complete child witness testimony she had encountered in 17 years of federal law enforcement. She said it with the specific, careful neutrality of a professional who understood that the quality of the testimony was inseparable from the horror of the experience that produced it. Eli was placed in foster care with a family in the next county. A couple named Warren, both retired teachers, whose home had been vetted by Rachel Voss personally and who had agreed, without being asked, to accommodate the one condition Eli had specified for his placement: a window facing the road. On the first Saturday, Reaper rode out to the Warren house. He parked his Harley at the end of the driveway, visible from the window, and sat on the bike for 10 minutes, not moving, not calling, not approaching the door. Then he rode away. On the second Saturday, he did the same thing. On the third Saturday, the front door opened and Eli walked out. His leg was in a proper cast now, clean, white, signed by 2 classmates and a teacher, and he was wearing clothes that fit and sneakers that were the right size, and a jacket that smelled like laundry detergent instead of motor oil and mildew. He walked to the end of the driveway, stood beside the Harley, looked at Reaper with eyes that were still too old for his face, but held something in them that hadn't been there before, a filament of light, thin and new, the first growth pushing through soil that had been frozen for a very long time. "You came back," the boy said. "Told you I would." "People say that." "I'm not people." Eli's mouth did the thing it had been trying to do since the hospital. The muscles moved, the intention completed, and this time the expression arrived. Small, tentative. Not the full, reckless smile of a child who has never been hurt, but something earned and careful and more valuable for its imperfection. "Mrs. Warren makes pancakes on Saturdays," Eli said. "She puts blueberries in them. She said I could invite someone." Reaper looked at the house, at the window, at the boy standing beside his bike in the winter sunlight with a clean cast and a jacket that fit and the smallest, bravest smile he had ever seen on a human face. "I don't like blueberries," Reaper said. "She makes plain ones, too." "Then yeah, okay." They walked up the driveway together, the boy and the biker, the child who had survived a cage and the man who had spent 30 years building one around himself. They walked at the boy's pace, slow, uneven, the cast making each step a negotiation with gravity. And neither of them spoke, because some walks don't require words and some silences are not empty but full of the accumulated weight of everything that has happened and the tentative, terrifying possibility of everything that might happen next. At the front door, Eli stopped. He looked back at the Harley in the driveway, at the road beyond it, at the world that had spent his entire short life failing him in every way a world can fail a child. "Reaper." "Yeah. Thank you. For the chair and the sandwich and—" He gestured vaguely at everything, the house, the driveway, the sky. All of it. Reaper looked at the boy. At this small, shattered, unbreakable person who had walked 3 miles on a broken leg and stolen a motel key and memorized a conspiracy and hidden a notebook and survived a garage and a bucket and a man who smiled too much and who was now standing on a porch in the winter sunlight asking to be thanked for the privilege of being alive. You did most of it yourself, kid. Not the part with the motorcycles. No, not that part. Eli opened the door. The smell of pancakes and coffee drifted out. Warm, ordinary, the smell of a Saturday morning in a house where no one was afraid. Inside, Mrs. Warren was moving in the kitchen, and the sound of a radio played softly, and the light coming through the windows was the pale, clean light of a day that held no hidden dangers and no locked doors. Reaper stepped inside. His boots left prints on the clean floor. His leather vest looked like something from another world against the wallpaper and the family photographs and the shelves of books that lined the hallway. He sat at the kitchen table. Mrs. Warren poured him coffee without asking how he took it, and he drank it black, and it was hot, and it was good. Eli sat across from him. The boy picked up a fork, looked at the stack of plain pancakes that Mrs. Warren had set in front of him without being asked, looked at Reaper. "Next Saturday?" the boy asked. Reaper drank his coffee, set the mug down, looked at the boy across a kitchen table in a house that smelled like blueberries and warmth, and he felt something shift in his chest. Not a crack, not a break, but an opening, small, deliberate, the size of a chair pulled out in a diner for a stranger who asked to sit down. "Next Saturday," he said. Outside, the Harley sat in the driveway, its chrome catching the winter sun. Down the road, past the fields and the oaks and the bend where Route 9 meets the county line, the world went on. Imperfect, dangerous, indifferent to the small victories and the quiet acts of courage that hold it together at the seams. But in a kitchen on a Saturday morning, a boy ate pancakes across from a man who had pulled out a chair. And for the first time in a very long time, neither of them was alone.